On a frozen battlefield, the fallen are scattered everywhere, and a white bird watches over it all. This small bird appears to survey the scene with a very serious and attentive gaze. In the background, a huge wall stands tall as snow continues to fall on the departed. Just then, a young blonde man named Adrian observes the place with a tired expression. He wears an impressive set of armor with golden details and a lion on his shoulder. Before him, a horde of furious monsters prepares to launch an attack. His sword reflects the faces of the dreadful creatures the hero is facing. A voice then narrates that over time, countless calamities have occurred. This led to innumerable wars that completely devastated the world. And with all these conflicts, countless heroes were also born to fight. The voice then reveals it has always been at the center of all these great events. It was in fact the demonic sword known as Gruhan. Back in the present, the protagonist takes a step forward into the icy snow. And now he finds himself alone against an entire army of monsters. Fierce and eager enemies have the young warrior completely surrounded. One of the creatures charges forward quickly, trying to hit him with an axe. But the blow strikes our protagonist's shoulder with great force. Looking like a gorilla, the monster leader roars for his soldiers to advance. With that, the entire horde rushes toward the lone warrior without hesitation. Then Adrian says he is no longer a sword as his blade begins to glow. He declares with shining eyes that he is now there as a knight. With that, the young man leaps into the attack, his blue energy cracking the ground. His blue eyes shine brightly, reflecting the mountain scenery. Even surrounded by enemies, the protagonist's face remains completely calm. The snowy mountains and icy valleys, along with the walls, fall silent. Bluish energy passes over one of the fallen warriors on the ground. At that moment, a soldier kneels as he is completely enveloped by the energy. Only the sound of the dawn trumpet echoes through the cold air of that place. Suddenly, several knights appear, shrouded in the same powerful blue aura. A massive wave of blue energy in the shape of a bird advances on the horde. Adrian activates his area of effect ability called the Winter's Poem. With a swift movement, the hero advances to attack all enemies at once. He remembers the ancient heroes who've now been forgotten by time. The young warrior then gives a slight smile, holding his sword firmly. Using his glowing blade, he easily cuts through several monsters. Our protagonist says that all these warriors of the past are adept heroes. Both his masters and their disciples fought bravely until the end. Another hero from the past is shown fighting a giant monster. And every legend they achieved was only possible thanks to the sword. We see the same female warrior cutting down a monster with a super fast strike. The protagonist wipes his face with his gauntlet, keeping a serious expression. Suddenly, the scene shifts to a mysterious purple eye watching everything from afar. Finally, in this age of calamity, Adrian comes face to face with the monster leader. The creature then lets out a furious roar as it prepares for combat. With his eyes glowing blue, the hero also prepares for the great fight. Shrouded in his bluish aura, the young warrior faces his opponent without fear. The two then collide with an immense force that kicks up snow from the ground. The gigantic creature tries to crush the knight with its huge, heavy hand. But our protagonist just gives a confident smile in the face of great danger. He says they will become a myth once more, and his sword appears in the scene. A narration begins, and we discover the hero was reincarnated as a sword. Over hundreds of years, he met several masters and turned them into heroes. Then the sword met its closest friend, a skilled blonde warrior. This boy named Leonberg was born in a nameless rural village and was very strong. Together, the two traveled the world, facing various types of monsters. And they achieved feats that no one could ever match in all of history. The scene then shifts to a mountain range with a lightning storm. Suddenly, a huge explosion of energy happens in the middle of that place. Leonberg appears again, but this time he is injured and screaming in pain. And finally, we see the warrior kneeling and defeated, his sword on the ground. A huge black dragon emerges from the mountains, covered in silver scales. The creature then lets out a deafening roar with pink energy coming from its mouth. Even injured, Leonberg kneels and prepares to face the giant monster. Then the great dragon fires a beam of pink energy at the warrior. The hero's sword begins to glow intensely with a powerful blue aura. With that, Leonberg stands up, both energies surrounding his entire body. He then smiles and tells his friend it's time for them to fight together. The warrior then charges with all his might toward the giant dragon without any fear. And with his blade, he delivers several cuts to the huge and powerful creature. Finally, he leaps toward the monster to deliver the finishing blow. After defeating the white god of the ice mountains, the battle finally ends. After that, his friend finally became the ruler of an entire nation. The sword, along with the legend of the Dragon Slayer, became famous throughout the kingdom. Leonberg then asks Gruhan to look after his descendants before he departs. The scene then cuts to a white flash and a very strange noise emerges. The sword then wonders why everything is suddenly so noisy around it. It complains that someone is swinging it around, and that's very annoying. A guy then yells that from now on he is the master of that sword. One of the guards begs the prince to return the object to its proper place. The sword then wonders what is happening and who this prince is. Is this brute really the prince? The sword wonders as the boy shouts he can touch anything. The ancient object can't believe what is happening at that moment. Deciding it needs to check, it uses its appraisal authority. It sees that the boy's name is Adrian Leonberg, and he is a descendant of its friend. But it wonders how a descendant of the Sword Saint can be so weak. The arrogant young man says that with the sword, no one will be able to ignore him anymore. The blade then thinks this guy is ridiculous and just says whatever he wants. The boy then yells for the dragon slayer to lend him its power. He continues to shout the sword's name with all his might. As the boy starts swinging the sword, the guards ask him to calm down. But he shouts for them to be quiet and asks if they want to be taken out. He thinks if he gets the sword's power, everyone will be like trash to him. But in the middle of his speech, the prince ends up tripping and falling awkwardly. The tip of the blade is pointed at him, and the boy doesn't understand what's happening. The guards and maids around scream in desperation at the scene they are witnessing. One of the maids is completely shocked and covers her mouth with her hands. As the prince falls to the ground injured, the guards shout to call the royal physician. The object thinks the scoundrel was the one who got hurt, so it doesn't understand the situation. Suddenly, the sword's vision starts to get blurry and it feels strange. For the first time, the sword feels like it's going to pass out, as the kingdom has no future with him. The narration says he inherited nothing from the royal family, but was the most arrogant. Besides that, he was a stupid, lazy, and violent brute named Adrian Leonberg. His existence was a dark cloud over the kingdom's future, and rumors began to spread. Two maids comment that the prince has changed because he no longer flips the dinner tables. They laugh, thinking he's just scared and will soon be back to normal. But the prince didn't care about the rumors. He was thinking about something else. The sword realizes it has taken over its friend's descendant's body and is shocked. A maid then announces the king has arrived and asks him to get ready quickly. The prince complains about the visit, and the maid asks him to be careful with his words. She gives a nervous smile as a dark knight appears behind her. The man says he has returned from the other side, but his temper remains the same. He then dismisses the maid, and the prince wonders who that fellow is. The knight asks if he's going to pretend not to know him after everything. The young man makes a mocking face and wonders if he is the brute's teacher. He pretends his memory is fuzzy, leaving the knight confused. Suddenly, the king's arrival is announced, and the prince is surprised. He then deduces the man in front of him must be the scoundrel's father, but upon seeing the king, he is surprised, thinking he is better than expected. He thought the lion's bloodline would have thinned over time, but he was wrong. The king scolds him for not greeting him and says he hasn't changed at all. Informing the king that the prince's memory is not intact, the knight leaves the king shocked by the news. Shortly after, the royal physician examines the young man, who is lying in bed while the others watch. The doctor then reports he found no abnormalities in his highness's body. He suggests it might be temporary symptoms caused by a mental shock. When the king mentions the memory loss, the protagonist wonders if he has been found out. The monarch then says with a serious expression that this is very convenient for the young man. He asks if the fact that he doesn't remember erases everything the prince has done until now. The boy's father says that everyone can make mistakes, but one must learn from them to grow. But he shouts furiously that since the boy has forgotten everything, there's no way for him to learn from the past. This means he hasn't taken a single step forward regarding his mistakes. And because of that, he won't be able to move forward in the future either, as a guard calls for calm. Our protagonist thinks he's in deep trouble and won't be treated well. He then wonders what on earth the previous owner of this body had been doing. Suddenly, a voice calls for Wan, and the young man is startled by the sudden call. A woman hugs him, saying she heard everything and that his memory will soon return. She says the past is trivial as she squeezes him tightly, almost suffocating him. The woman pinches his cheeks and says his face looks pale, leaving the boy confused. With a smile, she says she is very happy he has finally opened his eyes. Next, she warns him never to touch such a dangerous object again. The queen holds him with a worried look while the young man seems uncomfortable with the situation. Mentally, the protagonist apologizes to the queen because her son has already passed on. Looking at the castle at night, he thinks this whole situation is very complicated and tiring. With a smile, the queen says goodbye and says she will visit him again, much to his despair. As soon as she leaves, the young man lets out a long sigh of relief and frustration. He then remembers his friend asked him to look after his descendants, and he failed. But since things have come to this, he decides to live a good life for the departed. He thinks it doesn't matter that the body is overweight and untalented, as he has lived his life cleaning up others' messes. So he just needs to accumulate his power once more, and for that he clenches his fist. With a confident smile, he wonders if they know how many heroes he has trained. To begin his journey, the young man decides he first needs to refine a mana heart. He concentrates, beginning to gather the bluish energy in his mouth to start. With that, an immense blue aura completely envelops him as the energy gathers. The mana then concentrates into a glowing sphere in front of his chest. However, the energy suddenly disperses, leaving the young man completely confused. The former object realizes the mana dispersed because the body cannot accept it. Even so, he doesn't give up and decides to try concentrating the energy again. With even more determination, he tries to force the creation of the core once more. The young man tries his best, using all his will to control the energy. However, he fails once again and ends up on the floor, completely exhausted. Lying on the floor and sweating, he wonders what kind of useless body he ended up with. On the floor, he complains that if he had his original body, he would force the mana inside. At that moment, a maid enters the room and asks for permission to approach the prince. She then offers a tonic sent by the queen, saying it's bitter but good for him. The young woman asks him to please consider the sincerity of Her Majesty the Queen. The maid then makes a worried face, looking quite nervous about the situation. She remembers how the former prince would throw the bowl at her and refuse to drink. Our protagonist is surprised to see the drink and notices something different about it. The young man then realizes the bowl is emanating a blue aura because it contains mana. To the maid's surprise, he takes the bowl from the tray without complaining or shouting. The young man then drinks the entire contents at once, leaving the girl shocked. The maid is speechless at the prince's completely different attitude. He then places the empty bowl on the tray and tells her to leave because he is finished. As soon as the young woman leaves, he prepares to try again with a determined look. The young man concentrates and manages to create a small flame of mana in the palm of his hand. With a relieved look, he realizes that fortunately, the method is working now. But the amount is still very small and would dissipate after just a single day. He then calls the maid who is about to leave the room, tray in hand. The prince then asks if by any chance she has a little more of that drink. A few days later, a large amount of blue mana forms in the young man's hand. He then gives a victorious smile, saying he has finally gotten what he wanted. With the mana gathered, he wonders excitedly if he can finally create his mana heart. He boasts that he has done this countless times and could create a core with his eyes closed. But suddenly, the young man's confident expression changes to one of pure shock and pain. He then starts screaming desperately, feeling immense pain in his chest. He remembers others who felt their bodies burn and their chests nearly explode in the process. Remembering his past as a sword, he finally understands what is happening. The young man then realizes creating a mana heart has always been a painful process. With a cold sweat on his face, he tells himself not to lose consciousness no matter what, because if he passes out now, the mana will flow backward and cause great damage. Even with the immense pain, he strives to stay focused and not pass out. On his knees on the floor, he tries his best to maintain all his concentration. He then needs to control the mass of mana that is trying to spin out of control. Without rushing, he slowly guides the energy along the right path to the new heart. Gradually, the energy calms down and the young man enters a state of deep meditation. Suddenly, the young warrior opens his eyes with an expression of relief and success. With his hand on his chest and a smile, he says he finally managed to complete the process. He then reveals it's not something created for someone else, but one for himself. With a flushed face and a big smile, he celebrates that the process is complete. He clenches his fists and celebrates finally having his own mana heart. But in the middle of his celebration, he stops, realizing something strange has happened. Suddenly, a status window appears before him, stating that a mana heart has been created. He recognizes the message as one he used to send his masters and wonders why it's appearing. The window then shows it is restoring the connection to the source, leaving him confused. With that, several messages appear, saying the connection is unstable and the authorities are limited. But the third eye and third ear authorities are available in a limited capacity. He then looks at the window and wonders what these so-called authorities are. Suddenly, his vision becomes much sharper, and he can focus on a distant tree. The young man realizes he can see the leaves clearly, and that his vision has improved greatly. To his surprise, he also starts hearing sounds and words from outside the room. The young man overhears two maids gossiping on the other side of the door and is shocked. Suddenly, the protagonist feels a very strong headache and becomes dizzy. The status window warns that all mana in his body has been depleted, ending the use of authorities. With his hand on his head, he understands what the extremely limited use of the abilities meant. His former absolute senses from when he was a sword are unfortunately gone. For now, he can only use a little mana to hear or see a little better. But he clenches his fist, thinking everything will change when he expands his mana capacity. The young man gets into a fighting stance, determined to become stronger from now on. But suddenly his stomach rumbles, and he realizes he is very hungry after all. Meanwhile, a maid says she will serve him, and he thinks about adapting to a human body. The queen then appears with an admiring face and praises him for his new attitude. Pinching the young man's cheeks, the queen says she heard he took all his medicine. Suddenly, a man in black appears in the room, and the queen watches him from the sofa. The woman asks if the young man recognizes him, but the protagonist shakes his head. The man says it seems he has really lost his memory, and the queen asks for help. Our protagonist then realizes this man is the queen's brother, his uncle. The uncle scoffs, saying he didn't lose a magnificent past, and the young man senses the contempt. The man then says with a serious expression that he's going to make one thing very clear. He states that the only thing he can do is help him lose the excess weight. The uncle warns him not to get his hopes up, and the young man says he is already very grateful. The protagonist is completely confused by his uncle's attitude and gaze. With a threatening look, the man stares at his nephew very intensely. Suddenly, the uncle lands a strong kick on the young man, sending him flying. Lying on the floor, he hears that from now on, everything he does will require permission. The man smiles, saying that if he tries hard, he might teach him a secret technique. The young man finds it absurd for him to talk like that to the master of the kingdom's undefeated knight. The uncle then comments that seeing his fat jiggle must be very frustrating. Calling the man Kunkel, the young man bows to propose a small bet. He bets that in 6 months, he will make his uncle acknowledge him and break his arrogant gaze. With a smile, the young man says that if he fails, he will do whatever his uncle commands. But if he wins, the uncle will have to grant him a wish, and the man finds it interesting. Accepting the bet with a smile, the uncle says at least he'll have something to entertain himself with. Despite his tough talk, the young man struggles to run and quickly gets out of breath. He then complains about his heavy and clumsy body, which prevents him from moving properly. At that moment, a bluish aura begins to emanate from his feet with great intensity. The young man then decides to mobilize his mana to burn all the fat from his body. At this, his uncle is completely shocked, wondering what that boy is doing. The man then grabs his nephew by the shirt with an expression of total surprise. As for our protagonist, he just stares at him, not understanding the reason for such astonishment. The uncle then shouts, asking in disbelief if the young man really created a mana heart. The young man gives a smirk and replies casually as if it were no big deal. He shows the mana in his hand and asks if his uncle regrets the bet they made. Ignoring the question, the man asks what he was thinking when creating a mana core. He asks where the young man learned the method, saying the boy doesn't even realize what he did wrong. Our protagonist remains clueless, just staring at his uncle with a look of doubt. Then the uncle reveals that a mana heart is a low-level technique used by mercenaries. The young man shouts in shock at the revelation as the scene shows the castle in the background. With his hands on his face, he thinks desolately that this is truly the end of an era. The man reinforces that this is a technique practiced only by third-rate mercenaries. Our protagonist is paralyzed, completely shocked by the information he received. He asks what his uncle means, and the man replies it will be faster to show him. The uncle then tells him to watch carefully and creates a mana ring in his hand. Noticing that the man is forming rings, the protagonist becomes quite curious. With a swift movement, the man creates a huge blade of bluish energy. The mana blade then strikes the ground with incredible force, creating a bright flash. The uncle explains that mana chains can crush the aura of a mana heart. He says the family who used this technique fell into ruin, and no one uses it anymore. Reading a book on the subject, the young man thinks that times have really changed. The narration explains that mages use circles to control their magical energy. Meanwhile, knights weave chains to gather their own mana. A knight's level is defined by the number of chains he can create. Adrian then closes the book, saying all of this is complete and utter nonsense. He runs his finger over the author's name, thinking he has heard the name Altringen before. Suddenly, a memory from the past flashes in his mind, and he remembers something. In his life as a sword, he remembers a man asking about the Sword Saint. A warrior named Ernest Altringen challenged him using strange and mysterious arts. With a smile on his face, he thinks he knew the author's name was familiar. The young man then wonders what happened to that guy after all this time. The scene cuts to the training yard with the young man preparing to train. Someone then asks if he read the book that was given to him the previous night. His uncle glares at him, saying he should understand the situation and the foolish choice he made. The young man then responds with a mysterious air that he is in doubt about that. With a confident smile, he says he doesn't feel he made the slightest mistake. His uncle asks if he refuses to admit it or if he still doesn't understand the situation. The young man then says not all mana hearts are created equal. Shrouded in his aura, he asks if the man has ever heard of a class difference. The man is surprised, wondering what kind of nonsense his nephew is spouting. He then says there are mercenaries who delude themselves into thinking they are heroes of the past. His uncle reveals they all failed to surpass 2 chains and ended up in ruin. With a smile, he challenges the young man to prove he is different by defeating a knight. He promises to become his guardian if the young man wins, as his mother wishes. With a provocative smile, the prince questions if having his uncle as a guardian is a good thing. The two face each other in the training yard while the guards just watch. The man then stumps on the ground, asking if the young man questioned his qualifications. He introduces himself as a Count of the Kingdom and commander of the Northern Army. In addition, he is the master of the Black Lancers and one of the king's 5 silver lions. With that, an immense aura of 4 energy rings envelopes his entire body in the yard. He reveals with a serious look that he is actually a 4-chain knight. His name is Bale Balorhard, and he says one day he might stand beside his nephew. Bale then asks if that is qualification enough for the determined young man. Suddenly, one of the royal guards charges forward to attack the prince with his large shield. The guard unsheathes his sword and prepares for the surprise attack against the prince. The other knights advance, and one of them yells for the count to stay out of the fight. With a smile on his face, Bale just watches the scene, his blade shining brightly. The young man then shouts for his uncle not to go back on his word later. A short time later, the young man is on the ground, and they say that's enough for today. Sitting on a bench, he thinks with fright that he was moments away from meeting his end. His uncle scolds him, saying that with that kind of courage, he'd be lucky to beat a rookie. The protagonist limps away, calling his uncle a demonic fiend. Upon arriving in his room, a man was waiting, saying he had been expecting him. The gentleman introduces himself as the royal physician, feeling honored to be remembered. The prince asks what he is doing there, and the physician says the queen sent him. As the physician prepares a healing spell, the young man panics completely. He shouts that he doesn't need healing and pushes the poor old man away. Angrily, he says they are trying to throw all his suffering down the drain. The knight beside him just watches the scene in silence, without reacting. Suddenly, a voice calls for his brother, and a young man enters the room out of nowhere. The newcomer stares at the protagonist with an arrogant smile on his lips. The scene cuts to dinner, and Adrian eats with an expression of total contempt. With his mouth full, the young man wonders who on earth that fellow is. The knight whispers that he is the third prince, leaving Adrian confused. His brother says he heard about the accident, but that he looks better than expected. Adrian then asks what he wants and if he's just there to pick a fight. The third prince gets annoyed, thinking he's an idiot who got himself hurt. He then says he heard an interesting rumor while the protagonist continues to eat. The rumor is about the bet with the count to duel a two-chain knight. With a mischievous smile, the young man confirms it's exactly what he's talking about. He then approaches and offers to be his older brother's opponent. After the other leaves, the young man asks his guard who on earth that guy was. He complains, wondering why all of his friends' descendants are like this. The guard explains Prince Gillian has been famous for his swordsmanship since he was young. Additionally, he formed 2 rings at just 14 years of age and is very fast. Suddenly, a maid approaches the table and apologizes for interrupting. With a tray full of letters, she announces that mail has arrived for him. The young man picks one up, wondering why everyone is so interested in him now. With a suspicious look, the young man analyzes the envelope very carefully. He then begins to open and read all the letters that have arrived. They are all from people asking for a duel or offering to fight. Basically, everyone sees this as a chance to rough up the prince without consequences. With a wicked smile, the protagonist realizes a great opportunity has arisen. He then calls the maid and hands her a pile of letters with a plan in mind. With a mischievous smile, the prince asks the maid to write down the names of everyone who sent letters. The next day in the training yard, his uncle throws a wooden sword on the ground for his nephew. The protagonist is confused and doesn't understand what is happening. The man then orders the young man to pick up the wooden sword on the ground. Bale says the bet will only be valid if the young man knows basic swordsmanship, so there are no excuses. The young man picks up the sword, thinking his uncle has a very complicated personality. But as soon as he lifts the wooden sword, he feels immense pain in his body. He shouts that his muscles are aching, and his uncle stares at him with a serious expression. The man then approaches and asks if his nephew, by any chance, didn't receive healing magic. He continues, saying the young man should know this very well, since he is a knight. His uncle explains that healing magic prevents muscle growth, and the young man remains silent. With a slight smile, the man says his nephew should already know this basic information. Bale then changes the subject, saying that wasn't what he wanted to talk about today. He warns that he won't show it many times and asks the boy to pay close attention. The man reveals this is the kingdom's sword technique for building a knight's foundation. With a swift movement, his sword creates several images with a powerful bluish aura. His eye glows intensely as he concentrates to execute the sword technique. Suddenly, he performs a series of quick slashes that cut through the air around him. The bluish energy from his blade creates a light show in the training yard. Finally, he ends the demonstration in an imposing pose, sword in hand. The man's sword glows with a blue aura as he finishes demonstrating the technique. With a final strike, he ends his demonstration in an imposing combat pose. This movement creates a circular wave of energy that spreads across the training yard. Our protagonist is completely shocked and surprised by what he has just witnessed. He then asks in disbelief if that was really the basic technique for the kingdom's knights. His uncle stares at him with a serious expression and a very cold, calculating gaze. He says that because it's basic, it's not very sharp, but it's the best for learning to fight. Suddenly, the man stops talking and looks to the side with a questioning expression. It's because his nephew starts laughing loudly and mockingly at the whole situation. He thinks the technique that took down the mad dragon is now treated like trash. With a wicked smile, he can't believe the technique has become mere training. Bale says that's not enough to win the bet, but the young man suddenly interrupts him. The young man says he won't learn another swordsmanship style because that one is more than enough. His uncle stares at him with a disdainful expression, not seeming to believe a word. He then tells the boy to do as he pleases, and the young man grips the sword tightly. With that, the protagonist swings the wooden sword with impressive power. He thinks the reason the Dragon Slayer is treated this way is very simple. The young man tells himself it's a natural phenomenon, but he hates to admit it. It turns out the current Dragon Slayer no longer has the will to slay dragons. And those who use mana hearts have forgotten how to put their will into the sword. The young man tries to imitate the movement, but the wooden sword feels like it weighs a ton. He can barely stay on his feet while his uncle watches with a look of disapproval. Bale scolds him, saying using arm strength is useless and asking if he's already forgotten. With the wooden sword, he hits his nephew's stomach to correct his wrong posture. Next, he strikes the boy's legs, who cries out in pain from the surprise blow. The man explains that to swing the sword, one must use the strength of the entire body. The protagonist then understands what he needs to do and prepares to try again. He thinks his current body is too weak and clumsy to imitate the technique, but he swears he will prove the Dragon Slayer is no ordinary technique. With that, the days begin to pass, and the young man's intense training continues. He runs through the yard with all his strength, striving to improve his physique. After a week, he can already swing the sword with a bit more firmness. During the nights, he continues his mana training to strengthen his body. A month later, a status window appears, informing him he has managed to change his body. The young man looks exhausted, but his eyes shine with the hope of a better future. The system informs him his severe obesity has changed to normal and his metabolism has improved. Additionally, his clumsiness trait has disappeared and the effect of his exercises has increased. The window also reveals his constitution has changed due to the accumulation of mana. With a determined smile, he prepares to show the true power of the technique. Finally, the system announces his mana sensitivity disorder has completely disappeared. With his blue aura, he swings the sword much more naturally than before. The young man is completely exhausted but continues his training without stopping for a second. His eyes shine with the certainty that he is stronger than the day before. With a smile, he pushes himself to be even more perfect, and someone yells for him to stop. Suddenly, his brother appears and shatters his wooden sword, shouting at him. The pieces of the sword fall to the ground as a heavy rain begins to pour from the sky. In the middle of the rain, the prince, his uncle, and the king face each other in silence. The protagonist's hand is bleeding badly from the intense training. Blood then drips onto the ground, mixing with the unceasing rainwater. The young man stares at his uncle with a confused expression, not understanding what is happening. His blue eyes show all the determination he feels at that moment. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning strikes a training dummy with terrifying force. The wooden dummy explodes into several pieces from the impact of the thunder. The remains of the dummy are left in flames in the middle of the yard as the rain continues. Our protagonist is in shock, completely paralyzed by the scene he just saw. His uncle then grabs him, yelling that he's a fool for training on a day like this. Bale holds him tightly by the collar while the young man seems to be in a trance. The young man's hand is completely injured due to his excessive effort. A status window announces he has awakened from a state of super concentration. With a smile on his face, he laughs upon seeing the new ability he has acquired. He then thinks if he did that again, he would definitely be struck by lightning. As the king shouts for his son, his uncle holds him tightly to keep him from fainting. Bale looks at him with an expression of both concern and admiration. The young man finally passes out, and the man calls him stubborn as the rain continues. Some time later, the young man wakes up in his room with a sleepy expression. He sits up in bed, wondering if he somehow lost consciousness. With a hand on his head, he realizes he still doesn't know the limits of this body. He remembers when he was a sword and created several heroes over the centuries. One of them was the founder of the kingdom, who fought bravely in numerous battles. He remembers leading wars and guiding the path of all the great heroes. The sword Gruhan was known for being a great counselor and an excellent teacher. But looking at his hands, he realizes he was always just a spectator. Because of that, he became intoxicated with the feeling of reaping the rewards of his own effort. He then clenches his fist, deciding he needs to balance his body and mind. Sitting on the bed, he prepares for the next step of his intense training. With his eyes closed, he concentrates and a bluish aura completely envelopes him. A status window announces he has gathered enough mana to advance. A blue mana flame appears in his chest as he continues to meditate. The system then informs him his body can now withstand a little more energy. With that, his mana heart expands and a sphere of energy appears in front of him. The young man's hand touches the blue energy and the system announces his body can now handle more mana. With that, his physical constitution has completely changed due to the expansion of his mana heart. The protagonist opens his eyes, shocked by the immense wave of power he feels in his body. Enveloped by his blue aura, he celebrates finally finishing the process. The young man then looks at a real sword in his room and says it's time to test it. With a smile on his face, he approaches and grips the hilt of the blade firmly. As he swings the sword, a window announces he can now use the most basic level of aura. His reflection appears on the blade, and he thinks with this, he can at least fight at a basic level. Back in the courtyard, his uncle warns that rumors about him are spreading throughout the kingdom. With an irritated look, the man reveals their bet is causing a lot of trouble. Adrian suggests it would be better to find an opponent soon, and his uncle seems to agree. With a mischievous smile, the prince says he has actually already decided who he will face. He says he will first fight one chain knights, and his uncle lets him decide. The young man then calls a knight named Carls and asks about what he had requested. The man hands him a list, saying he has organized all the duel requests against the prince. Carls asks worriedly if his highness really intends to fight those people. The knight warns that most of them hate him and might try something during the duel. With a confident smile, the young man says he already knows that and has a plan. He then asks his uncle to be the judge for all his fights in the courtyard. The protagonist says he just wants to prevent anyone from getting taken out and asks if he can do that. Days later, on the day of the first fight, a young man appears, sweating and very scared. He then stares at the first prince's palace, calling him a scoundrel and a wretch. The young man introduced himself as Taylor Tilheim, the second son of a baron's family. In a flashback from a few years ago, the former prince laughed very arrogantly. The old Idring humiliated Taylor's father and brother in front of all the nobles. Because of this, the young man grinds his teeth and swears revenge against Idri and Leon Berger. Vowing to make him pay dearly for that day, he finally faces the prince and his uncle. Taylor then formally introduces himself as an apprentice knight of an order. But the prince mocks him, saying he looks too weak to be a knight. The boy becomes furious, thinking the rumors about the prince's arrogance are true. The protagonist's uncle then interrupts, asking him to calm down as the fight hasn't started. Embarrassed, the young man stammers and calls the older man by his name, Lord Balorhart. He bows, saying it's an honor to meet him, and the man just greets him. Adrian complains that from the boy's reaction, anyone would think his uncle was the prince. His uncle scolds him for his past actions, and the young man complains that it's all he talks about. With a serious expression, the man then sends them both to their fighting positions. He raises his hand and announces that the first match will finally begin. The two then face each other with their swords crossed, ready for combat. At that moment, a powerful bluish aura completely envelopes the challenger's body. With a confident smile, he tells His Highness to be careful and charges forward with all his might. The challenger's sword hits the ground with a loud sound, creating a small crater. The prince defends himself from Taylor's attack, who is completely enveloped in his blue aura. With a confident smile, the young man says his opponent's moves are completely useless. The swords clash, and a large wave of blue energy spreads throughout the courtyard. Taylor is shocked and wonders if that on the prince's sword is a mana heart. With a single blow, the protagonist throws his opponent far away, breaking the ground. He wonders how a mana heart managed to block his mana chain. The hero says with a smile that he only felt a small tingle in his arm. The challenger is completely confused, not understanding what just happened. The knights hear a sound from the sword and wonder what it could be. The protagonist's uncle is shocked, realizing that sound is a sword's lament. The young man grips the hilt of the blade, thinking this can't be happening. Taylor shouts that it's impossible and charges again with his aura at full strength. The speed of the attack surprises Adrian, who has a look of complete astonishment. The swords clash again, but this time the prince seems to be in trouble. With a cry of fury, the knight begins to deliver a sequence of rapid blows. The collision of the blades creates an explosion of energy that blinds everyone around. The heir to the throne is forced to retreat, sliding across the training yard floor. When the dust settles, the two face each other again, ready for the next attack. Panting, Adrian thinks that the man of the ring and the heart are opposite, and this is true. The protagonist clutches his chest, feeling his mana about to go out of control at any moment. However, he faces his opponent and asks if he is the second son of Baron Tailhim. The prince then points his sword at the young man, saying he needs to cool his head. He then closes his eyes, concentrating deeply in the middle of the battle. The young man then imagines himself submerged in a dark, deep place like the ocean. In this place, he reaches out his hand, and with his eyes glowing blue, he says to awaken. He then summons a part of his soul that was once called a magical and divine sword. His hand touches the blade, which shines brightly with a very strong bluish energy. A status window announces his mana heart has accepted a great will. The system then says the dormant will of the Dragon Slayer has finally awakened. This is the most recent memory of the sword, created to take down dragons. With this, the system informs everyone the Dragon Slayer's heart has been activated. Back in reality, Adrian's eyes now glow with an intense red light. The power of the sword merges with his heart's energy, and a dragon's aura emerges. This dark and sinister energy was abandoned in order to annihilate dragons. Taylor is completely terrified, wondering what kind of absurd power this is. The protagonist's uncle becomes desperate, shouting for him to stop immediately. But the young man doesn't listen, preparing to attack with that dangerous sword. In a flashback, Adrian makes a request to his uncle before a training session. He asks his uncle to stop him if he is about to take out his opponent. Back to the fight, the prince charges with his malevolent aura while Taylor watches in shock. The uncle then moves to intercept him, remembering the request to be stopped if necessary. An explosion of red and blue energy occurs when the older man blocks the attack. With his sword covered in a bluish aura, he manages to stop his nephew at the last second. The young man is thrown against the wall, falling to the ground completely exhausted and weak. The man then sheathes his blade with a serious expression after containing the prince's attack. The other knights surround him, accusing him of trying to take out a member of royalty. But Adrian stands up and tells everyone to back off, because he was the one who asked for it. Wiping blood from his mouth, he admits he asked for it but didn't expect so much. The young man says his uncle wasn't supposed to knock him down so hard. Meanwhile, a blue skull-shaped energy leaves his chest and dissipates. Back in his room, the protagonist holds his chest, thinking his mana heart almost shattered. He realizes his uncle's power is on another level, something he felt when he took the hit. Fortunately, looking at the blue flame, he notices there are no side effects. With a smile, the young man celebrates that in the end, everything worked out, and he won the fight. A voice then asks why he is so happy, and the young man sits up in bed, confused. His uncle appears, asking what on earth he did during the fight in the courtyard. The man shouts, questioning him about the malevolent sword he used, which he never taught him. With a serious face, the hero says he was just being true to the essence of the sword. His uncle falls silent, thinking an inexperienced boy wouldn't understand that. The uncle then thinks the essence of the sword is the intention to take out the opponent. The protagonist is surprised by the answer and looks at his relative in an unexpected way. He says he was expecting a lecture on the path of the sword and the pursuit of perfection. But his uncle reveals he is a soldier and seeks victory above a knight's righteousness. Adrian remains silent, processing his mentor's words about battle. The man then warns that his nephew's sword is excessive and could harm his allies. The young man replies that's why he's doing all of this, to fix it. With his arms crossed, his uncle says he will watch to see if he gets consumed by his inner demons. After 3 days of training, Taylor's sword sticks into the courtyard ground with force. The prince then approaches and asks if the young man's name is really Taylor Tellium. Adrian thanks him for his hard work, and we see the knight suffered greatly in training. The hare says it would have been better if the young man had hit him at least once. The protagonist then calls a maid and asks her to bring him something. The woman hands him a wooden chest, and the knight asks what it is. The prince says he heard he did something terrible to his family in the past. He then hands over the chest, saying it is an offering and a letter for Baron Telham. Adrian dismisses him and tells him to be careful on his way back home. The young man thinks he has no obligation to clean up the former prince's mess. The here's training becomes the main topic in the kingdom, and everyone comments on it. Some nobles gossip that he will pay for his mistakes and can't wait to see it. Even after several days, the news the people were waiting for did not reach the kingdom. All those who fought against the prince began to praise and defend him. The gossiping nobles are shocked, concluding the royal family silenced them. But the protagonist hears this and slams the table in anger, shouting that it's a lie. He yells they are only quiet out of shame for having lost to him. Adrian complains about the nobles, and his uncle says he's not the best person to talk. In a flashback, one of the knights trembles in fear before the prince with a chest. The young man threatens him, telling him to spread the result of the fight, and the boy agrees immediately. Back in the present, he crosses his arms, thinking the rumors will finally stop. But he turns around with a shocked expression and asks what has happened now. A maid informs him that now the rumors say he is forging the results. The young man's face darkens as he realizes his plans have gone completely wrong. With a wicked smile and a blue aura, he says it's better if they just train. That said, he begins to swing his sword rapidly, creating a trail of energy. The hare continues his intense training, moving with incredible agility. His movements are precise, showing his great dedication to getting stronger. He then fully concentrates on his strikes, seeking perfection in each one. The young man's sword glows with an intense blue aura as he wields it with mastery. With the man a heart glowing in his chest, he seems more determined than ever. He asks Carl's how many are left, and the knight replies that today's is the last one. The hare then sighs, saying apprentice knights are no longer a challenge. But Carl's warns him the last on the list is a female knight who has good mastery of the sword. She wasn't content with just refining her family's sword style and joined an elite order. With a smile, the young man realizes she is an apprentice of the Iron Lion Knight's order. At this, the name Arwen Cregain is announced as a woman in armor enters the courtyard. The other knights confirm it's her by the order's crest on her armor. The woman was known as the Thorn Rose, the one who broke every man's heart. The guards comment on her beauty, impressed that the prince made her come all this way. With a determined expression, the knight prepares for the confrontation to come. Unbothered by the whisper, she seems completely focused on what she needs to do. One of the knights then says it would be funny if the prince were humbled by her. It's explained that the Order of the Iron Lion is elite, and Arwen is a rising star. Adrian is confused, wondering why a prodigy like her would come to fight him. Carls explains there was a misunderstanding, but the young man knows his former self picked a fight. So he calls a maid and asks what exactly he did to the knight in the past. The young woman gets nervous, hesitating to tell his highness what really happened. She then reveals the prince crossed a line with Arwen, leaving the young man shocked. He then freaks out, pulling his hair while cursing his former self for being crazy. In a flashback, the old Adrian approaches the knight with a very disgusting look. He calls her by name, says she's as beautiful as the rumors said, and invites her to serve him. The knight then rejects the proposal, pushing him away with a swift, firm gesture. She warns him the knightly order is not his private property. Filled with rage, the former prince insults her, calling her a very nasty name. Back in the present, the young man remembers shouting something similar. He thinks it was just a pathetic attempt by a scoundrel to get attention. Besides, he thinks no one in their right mind would call her that. The young woman then greets him, saying it's been a long time, and he hasn't changed at all. The hare awkwardly replies that he has changed a lot, it's almost like a soul swap. With a serious look, she stares at him, and he realizes this is all his karma. At that moment, his uncle Count Balorhard finally arrives at the training ground. The older man then stares at her with a serious and curious expression. The young knight bows and greets the count with great respect. He then warns her to be careful, as the prince's sword is poisonous. His uncle simply ignores his nephew's complaint about his neutrality. With a smile, the man then sends them both to their fighting positions. With his hand raised, he announces the training match will finally begin. The warrior then gets ready, assuming a very swift attack stance. With a smile, the young man says he'll see the skill of the Iron Lion's prodigy. That said, the knight charges forward with incredible speed, shrouded in blue energy. Her reflection appears in the protagonist's eye, who admits she's quite decent. Arwen attacks with a powerful blow, and the prince barely manages to defend against the impact. With his mouth bleeding, he realizes the mana backlash is starting to affect him. The knight continues her relentless attack, giving him no chance to breathe. The heir to the throne groans in pain as he's pushed back by the opponent's force. In a sequence of rapid strikes, the young woman shows her superiority in battle. The young man realizes he's being completely dominated and needs to change his tactics. He watches the warrior's silhouette moving quickly, ready for the next attack. With no other choice, the protagonist activates the Dragon Slayer's heart, and a red aura envelopes him. The knight is shocked to see the sudden change in the prince's power. Their swords clash, an explosion of red and blue energy fills the courtyard. Now it's the young woman's turn to be forced back by the heir's immense wave of power. She recovers quickly, facing him with a serious and very determined expression. Panting, the warrior wonders what kind of sword style he is using. The young man smiles, thinking she's on a different level from the other opponents. He then uses his appraisal ability to analyze his opponent's stats. The window shows that Arwen Kurgan is a 19-year-old swordswoman with great potential. With a serious face, the young man analyzes the information he has gathered about the knight. He smiles confidently, thinking if he can see this with limited authority, it means something. His conclusion is she is either a weaker opponent or has a similar power level. That said, the blades clash again in a battle of pure skill and power. The young man shouts that the real fight starts now, and the two advance with their auras at maximum. After a long and intense exchange of blows, the prince appears panting and very tired. On the other side, Arwen is also breathing heavily, showing how tough the fight was. The two face each other in the training yard, ready to continue the exhausting battle. At that moment, one of their swords falls to the ground with a loud, metallic sound. His uncle then stops the fight, saying that's enough for today, and they will continue tomorrow. Adrian complains with a smile, saying he was about to finish the fight. But the knight replies that, coincidentally, she was thinking the same thing. The two stare at each other with a challenging smile, and she says she's ready for more rounds. The older man then shouts for them both to stop that provocation immediately. He says it's late and tells them both to get treatment for their injuries. A healer approaches the heir, saying he will treat him quickly with his magic. With a sour look, the young man receives the treatment as the man talks about his injuries. On the other side of the yard, the warrior is also being treated by another palace healer. The young woman remains silent with a thoughtful expression after the intense battle. After the treatment, the two stand back without saying a single word. As she walks away, the heir to the throne thinks that he will not lose, no matter what. One of the spectators thinks this fight doesn't seem to have an end in sight. The knights watching comment that it's already the third day and they are surprised. One of them says he heard about Arwen's skills, but the prince's are incredible too. One of the knights then says he hopes to see a result in today's fight. But before starting, the heir smiles and says he has something to say. The warrior asks if he is by any chance planning to apologize now. With a serious look, she warns that she won't accept it, and the young man finds that admirable. The prince denies it, saying it's nothing like that while gesturing with his hand. He then suggests that since the fight is so close, there should be a prize. The proposal is that the loser grants a wish to the winner, whatever it may be. The knight remains silent, seeming to think about the prince's bet. The other knights protest, but the young man tells them not to meddle. The young man then turns to the woman and asks what she thinks of the proposal. She replies that as an apprentice loyal to the royal family, she cannot commit a crime. But with a smile, she says she feels entitled to receive the prize of the bet. With his red aura, the heir praises his opponent's good thinking. He shouts that there's no going back, and the two advance for the final showdown. The swords of the two warriors clash with incredible force in the courtyard. The warrior then attacks with a blow of blue energy at a surprising speed. The prince watches her with a wicked smile and glowing red eyes. He releases a blast of red energy to block his opponent's attack. The heir thinks she is very fast, much quicker than before the bet. Shrouded in the dragon's aura, he wonders if she was hiding her skills. Their exchange of blows continues at an absurd speed, and the courtyard becomes a blur. The warrior defends a powerful attack but feels the force of the impact in her arm. She is then thrown back, and the prince advances with his red aura at maximum. Panting and with a cut on her face, the knight faces her opponent with determination. The young man then concentrates all his energy and prepares the final blow. He attacks with all his might, but the woman manages to block at the last second with her aura. A large explosion of red energy occurs from the clash of the two swords. The knight's blade cannot withstand the pressure and shatters into several pieces in the air. Disarmed and on her knees, the warrior stares at the ground as her sword falls beside her. The other knights watching the fight are shocked by the final result. The protagonist's uncle observes the scene with a serious and surprised expression. The young woman looks up in disbelief, saying this can't be happening. With his shadow covering his opponent, the young man says with a smile that he won the bet. He then points his sword at Arwen Kurgan, and the woman is left speechless on the ground. With a confident and victorious smile, the young man prepares to state his wish. He then reveals his wish, saying he wants her, leaving the warrior completely shocked. The scene then changes and Carls narrates that he became the prince's escort knight. He remembers introducing himself and saying he was looking forward to serving his highness. The former prince seemed arrogant but wasn't cruel as the rumors claimed. But now, The new heir to the throne is always rushing to his intense training sessions. Carls thinks that contrary to the rumors, the prince was nothing like they said. He remembers the heir training non-stop under a heavy rain. At that time, he suggested to the other knights that they stop the young man's training. Worried, the escort knight shouted it was dangerous and asked him to stop, but the young man ignored him, continuing his training and destroying everything with his strength. Even exhausted, the heir smiled with an unshakable determination. The escort knight was shocked and admired by the prince's willpower. It was at that moment he felt his highness would become a great person. Back in the present, the young man faces the warrior on the ground and says he wants her for himself. The other knights are shocked, calling the prince's request indecent. Carls is confused, wondering if he perhaps misjudged his highness after all. The knight then faces him with an expression of surprise and great confusion. With a furious look, she asks if that is truly his highness's wish. He confirms, saying now she is just an apprentice who failed to defeat him. With a confident smile, the young man begins to explain what he really wants. He reveals he wants the potential and future of a knight named Arwen Kurgayan. The prince continues, saying he needs a knight who will truly follow him. He doesn't want someone by royal command, which surprises his escort knight. The young man explains he wants a knight who belongs only to him and no one else. He then says she has a talent with the sword, and that's why he chose her. With a smile, the young man then turns to the woman and calls her by name. He completes his wish, asking Arwen to become his personal knight. In a flashback, the warrior narrates that she became the knight she always dreamed of being. But everyone only commented on her appearance, not treating her like a warrior. That's why she worked harder than anyone to prove her worth to everyone. The young woman then easily defeated all the other apprentices in the knightly order. With her serious expression, she is announced as the grand winner of that confrontation. The knight then remembers defeating everyone with her great skill with the sword. She was clearly superior, giving her opponents no chance in the arena. But even with her talent and excellent results, things didn't change much for her. The other knights saw her only as a pretty young woman, not as a warrior. With a sad expression, she realizes she would never be seen as one of them. Back in the present, she asks if he really wants her potential as a knight. Arwen then faces Idrian, asking if he is truly being sincere with her. The young woman then asks the heir to the throne to promise just one thing. She asks that he treat her as a knight and not as just any woman. The warrior says if he does that, she will follow all his orders faithfully. With a serious look, the young man faces the woman and thinks about the unexpected request. With tears in her eyes, the young woman anxiously awaits the heir's answer. The protagonist then accepts the proposal and promises he will keep his word. The warrior then kneels before the prince, swearing her loyalty to him forever. With a smile, the young man accepts, saying Arwen Kurgayan now swears loyalty to him. The heir completes that she offers her sword and her life to serve him forever. The protagonist's uncle watches the whole scene in silence with a very serious expression. With that, the heir to the throne touches the woman's shoulder with the blade of his sword. The knight then accepts the oath, officially becoming his faithful protector. The scene is watched by everyone in the courtyard, who seem shocked by what just happened. Later, the knights gossip about the warrior's oath to the prince. They find it absurd, saying the oath should be nullified because it came from a bet. Others think there is something suspicious and that the two might be having a secret affair. Idrian hears the rumors and freaks out, shouting he's not some villain from a crazy story. Angrily, he complains he has now become the scum of the kingdom because of false rumors. His escort knight just watches him in silence, not knowing what to say. Carls then calls his highness, and the young man turns to hear what he has to say. The man asks about what he said on the last day of training, and the young man is confused. He then remembers saying he didn't want a knight by royal command at his side. The young man asks if that hurt him, saying if he received a royal order, he would leave. With a smile, the heir says if necessary he could swear loyalty later. The knight then faces him and asks if he would accept his oath of loyalty. But the prince simply turns away and answers with a resounding no, leaving the young man shocked. The heir says Carls is not fun to train with, and that's why he doesn't like him. The escort knight starts laughing, thinking it's a joke, but the prince remains serious. With his arms crossed, Idrian says he wasn't joking and was telling the truth. Suddenly, a letter arrives announcing his confinement is over and he must attend a royal banquet. The young man scratches his head in confusion as his sentence ended a month and a half ahead of schedule. He then remembers his father seemed furious when he locked him in the royal palace. A maid asks if he isn't happy, but the young man says he doesn't understand the king. He replies he doesn't care much as he has nowhere to go and no one to meet. At this, the young woman notices there is another envelope with the king's royal letter. She apologizes, saying she found an invitation addressed to his highness. With a confused face, the protagonist asks what this mysterious invitation could be. The woman then hands him the invitation, which has a very elegant and fancy seal. The young man reads it and discovers it's from an exclusive social club for young nobles. The maid explains it's a group he used to frequent, and he is shocked. The heir then asks if it's a strange place, and the woman hesitates to answer. She says the refined pleasures of young nobles are incomprehensible to women. He understands it's just for drinking and flirting, and says he's busy training. But upon turning the invitation over, the young man notices something written on the back. The letter was sent by a friend who calls him wise, brave, and considerate. With a confused expression, the prince wonders who on earth this Ali could be. He recognizes the name, remembering his uncle mentioning a family obsessed with mana. With this, he decides to go to the event and asks the maid to make preparations. The young man then crumples the invitation, hoping that family isn't too run down. 4 months later, a tailor asks if he liked the new outfit he made. The young man describes the outfit's color as black, with very simple decorations. The tailor says even though it's simple, the prince's dignity remains intact. The man notices he has lost weight, saying his measurements have dropped by half. The protagonist asks for the banquet clothes but tells him to wait a bit. With a smile, he warns that his measurements will change again by the event. Days later, the young man finally goes to the social club for young nobles. On his horse, Carl accompanies him as his faithful personal escort knight. In the carriage, the prince complains that being royalty is a very tiresome position. The young man says the clothes, the carriage, and the guards are all frustrating. At this, the heir to the throne notices something about his maid who is with him. He then stares at the young woman sitting in front of him inside the carriage. The young man then asks the young woman about a wound on her neck. She replies it was her fault and that he could have reprimanded her for it. He gets irritated, thinking his former self continues to create urban legends about him. The heir realizes the maid has been with him for months, and he doesn't even know her name. With his arms crossed, the young man then asks the woman her name. The young woman introduces herself as Adelia Bayern, leaving the heir to the throne very surprised. He thinks about the name, remembering it's a family that barely appears in the nobility's registry. In a flashback, we see that in the past, humans were weak and hunted by other races. But a group of warriors emerged to put an end to that history of massacres. They became the saviors of humanity and were called the Five Chosen. One of these 5 legendary heroes was a swordswoman with a long, red cape. The protagonist remembers her because he was the sword Gruhan that the woman used in battle. The warrior then asks her blade if it has ever thought about the future for all of them. Facing an army of giants, she wonders what they would do when the war was over. With a serious and determined look, the heroine prepares for the greatest of her battles. The woman then charges forward with her blade, delivering a very powerful energy strike. She leaps into the air, facing the immense king of the giants who awaits her. The warrior was the one who defeated the king and ended the long history of raids. With a single precise blow, she manages to eliminate the monster once and for all. She was the Marchioness of the Iron Blood Sword Agnes Bayern, the maid's ancestor. With a smile on her face, the heroine observes the battlefield after her victory. Looking at the fallen giants, she complains that they are all just insects. The warrior's eyes glow with an intense golden light as she watches everything. She gets irritated, saying they always come back to try to steal something from her. The woman then adds that the only special thing they have is their size. With a furious expression, the warrior shouts that their actions are the stuff of insects. Holding her sword tightly, she says she hates people and things like that. Back in the present, the prince freaks out, saying just thinking about it dirties his ears. With a serious face, he thinks the descendant of that heroine is his maid. He then wonders what on earth happened for her family to end up like that. At that moment, the carriage stops, and the escort knight announces their arrival. Carl then opens the door and calls for his highness to get out and enter the social club. The young man gets up, irritated by the exact moment the carriage stopped. The heir to the throne then steps out onto the stone ground outside the venue. But before leaving, he turns and tells Adelia he wants to talk with her later. The young woman is completely confused, not understanding what the prince wants to discuss. A voice then calls for his highness, and a young man with white hair appears, smiling. He introduces himself as Bernardo of the Ely family and greets Prince Adrian. Bernardo says he is happy he is well, but the heir thinks he is a delinquent. The white-haired young man comments on how much weight the prince has lost and seems concerned. With a mischievous smile, the protagonist finds this whole situation very interesting. Bernardo asks if he is not well, but the heir says it was good that he came. With a smile, he places his hand on the young man's shoulder, saying the day will be fun. The white-haired young man is confused by the prince's sudden attitude. Inside the club, a young man tells a story about a young woman who opened her skirt. One of the nobles in the group compliments a young woman's skin while harassing her relentlessly. The protagonist and the other nobles watch the scene in a room full of luxury and drinks. Bernardo finds it strange as the old prince would already be drunk and causing trouble. But the heir to the throne just holds his wine glass with a very calm expression. One of the young men then approaches the protagonist to talk about something. With a mischievous smile, the man says he heard a rumor about his highness. He then reveals the rumor is about the knight Arwen and the prince having been with her. Adrian just listens in silence without showing any reaction to the noble's words. The man complains he also had his eye on her and should have made the oath first. He then continues making some very disgusting comments about the knight's appearance. The heir interrupts him, asking if he has any younger brothers or sisters at home. The prince says it's lucky he has a brother, while Bernardo is very confused. The noble then asks what it is and gets a very strong punch right in the face. With a single blow, the protagonist hits the man's face with great force. The punch is so powerful it sends the noble flying, breaking everything in his path. The man falls to the ground amidst shards of glass, and a woman screams in fright. All the other guests at the party are completely shocked by the scene. The prince's friend is also speechless at the hare's violent attitude. The young man smiles, saying it's a good thing his family's lineage won't be cut short. He then kicks the man on the ground with great force, and a purple aura envelopes him. The prince's purple aura explodes, and the white-haired young man screams in despair. With a furious look, he says from now on, the younger brother will be the hare. The protagonist then advances with a closed fist, ready to attack again. He then lands a punch right in the middle of another noble's face at the party. A blonde woman and a young man with blue hair are shocked by the hare's violence. Even Bernardo and the other guests are speechless at the scene they just saw. With great anger, the young man then grabs the collar of the noble he just hit. He lifts him up, asking what on earth His Highness is doing there at that moment. With a swollen face, the man hears the prince tell him to listen very carefully. The hare says he can tolerate being thought of as a scoundrel, but not being treated like one. The other nobles are confused, wondering what he is talking about. He shouts the man needs another beating and hits him with another powerful punch. The blow sends the noble flying across the social club's hall. After the attack, the prince stands there watching while everyone stares at him in fear. The man then falls to the ground, completely unconscious after the beating. The heir to the throne then calls for Yahello, who responds in fear, kneeling on the floor. With a wicked smile, he asks if he didn't tell him the day would be very fun. The white-haired young man wonders why this madman is suddenly acting this way. Adrian then turns and tells the young man to go get the royal court knights now. Terrified, Bernardo agrees and runs off to obey His Highness's order. While Bernardo runs, the social club's hall falls into a very tense silence. The protagonist wipes the blood from his face and stares at everyone with a cold gaze. He then turns and orders all the women to leave the place immediately. One of the nobles remains silent, looking around nervously. The young man begins to walk slowly on his tiptoes to try to escape, but Adrian stares at him, saying he remembers only telling the women to leave. With a wicked smile, he says if the young man leaves, he'll be leaving like a woman. The other nobles scream in fear, realizing there is no escape from the prince. The hare says they didn't even bother to kneel or show respect. He then continues, revealing they mocked him right to his face the entire time. With a serious look, the young man adds that they insulted his personal knight. He turns to the door and asks what charges can be applied in this case. The knights arrive, saying it's an insult to the royal family for looking down on royalty. The nobles become desperate, their eyes wide with pure fear of what's to come. One of the knights warns that since they dare to undermine the crown, this is treason. The leader of the knights then asks who His Highness wishes to be punished. With a confident smile, the prince prepares to give his final order. Looking at the frightened nobles, he tells the knights to take them all away. Sometime later, a voice says he caused a big scene as soon as his sentence was over. The king shouts that 14 sons of nobles were taken for insult and treason. The king then asks his son if he has any idea what he has just done. The sovereign says the reaction of 14 families cannot be ignored in any way. With a smile, the heir to the throne asks if he is worried about the repercussions. The young man explains they are outcasts and failures who would only bring shame to their families. Adrian then suggests with a smile that his father should send some letters to them. The king asks to whom, and the young man says there are people who handle noise better. The protagonist reveals they are the brothers of the scoundrels he locked in the dungeon. He then asks if he is by any chance wrong, and his father remains silent on the throne. The sovereign dismisses him, and the young man leaves happily, thinking he left his father speechless. Back in his room, he tells Adelia not to be tense, as he won't hurt her. The young woman is terrified, asking, stuttering, what Her Highness thinks she did wrong. The young man thinks his former self must have tormented the poor girl a lot in the past. He then remembers her family barely appears in the kingdom's registry of nobility. Their glorious history was erased, and their unparalleled arts were lost. Over time, the great power and pride of that family disappeared without a trace. A status window then appears, showing all the young maid's information. The heir to the throne is shocked, wondering what on earth he is seeing. He reads the young woman's traits, confused by the names butcher and war instigator. The description says she goes mad with blood but is good-hearted at the same time. The protagonist freaks out because she has unparalleled talent but nothing to control her madness. He pulls his hair, wondering if it's right to unleash that madness upon the world. The young man then turns his back to the maid, seeming to think of a plan. With a determined look, he decides he should at least try to do something. He remembers her talent is S rank and there is a trait he can use. The servile nature is a trait that makes her feel joy when serving a master. The hare then turns to Adelia, asks her to swear loyalty to him. The young woman is completely shocked, saying she doesn't understand what he means. The prince explains she will become his knight and must swear now. The young woman falls to her knees, shouting she can't handle something so big. He says he will take responsibility for her insignificant house. In exchange for the favor, the young man asks her to swear loyalty and serve him as master. The young man warns if she can't control her madness, he will do it himself. The maid then asks if he will really take care of her family, and he confirms. With a smile on her face, the young woman accepts the proposal and says she will take the oath. Adelia then kneels, swearing her total loyalty to Prince Adrian Leonberger. She promises to dedicate herself and serve him as her master for the rest of her life. With his hand on her head, the heir to the throne just says that's good enough. He warns that from now on, she must obey his orders without question. With shining eyes and a smile, the young woman seems very happy with her new master. But the protagonist turns away, wondering if he really made the right choice. Rumors spread that the prince has gone back to being a scoundrel, forcing a knight to swear loyalty. They say he summoned nobles to beat them up and then threw them in prison for no reason. Now the gossip is that he made a maid his knight to build a disguised harem. With his hands on his chin, the young man wonders since when everyone became so interested in him. Sitting in his chair, he complains he only took one knight, but everyone has something to say. The king shouts he has a headache cleaning up his mess, asking if he is drowning in luxury. His uncle calls him pathetic and asks if he has completely given up on the bet they made. Even his brother appears with a smile, saying taking a maid as a knight is just like him. The young man gets irritated, complaining about how quickly rumors spread throughout the kingdom. A maid announces the queen has arrived to visit, and the young man freaks out, shouting that's enough. His mother says just when it seemed he had changed, he went back to how he was before. But with a serious look, the woman reveals this is actually for the good of everyone. She says when a partner is chosen for him, the young man will finally settle down, and he is confused. The queen then shouts for him to trust her, because she will definitely choose his bride this time. The woman holds her son's face, who thinks he no longer knows what is going on. Back to Adelia, the young woman asks if she will also receive this thing called mana now. The heir confirms, saying she will gain a very special mana for her training. With shining eyes, the young man uses his power, and a bluish energy completely envelops him. A golden aura surrounds the young woman as he thinks the world has forgotten the Sword Empress, but he has not. The young man remembers her steps and the sword that danced in her hands during battles. The golden image of a warrior appears and touches the young maid's neck. The ancient heroine's energy transfers to the young woman, whose eyes widen. The young man remembers the sound of her heart, which beat with a magnificent spirit. A status window then announces Adelia Baron has finally managed to feel mana. The system informs the mana has been successfully implanted in the future knight's body. Next, the notice says the energy has completely settled in the girl's body. The young woman's eyes then shine with an intense, powerful golden light. With that, a notification informs a mana heart has finally been created. The young woman stares at the light in her hands, saying this is the mana she has heard so much about. The prince then explains she has just refined her mana heart to become stronger. But suddenly, the heir to the throne falls into a chair, and the maid shouts for her highness. She asks if he is okay, and the young man thinks he ended up like this just from creating a mana heart. He says he is just a little tired, and the young woman asks why he went so far for her. With a sour look, the young man tells the girl to leave, as it's already done. He then asks why she is staring at him that way, and the young woman stutters. With a smile, the young woman bows and swears she will serve him with loyalty for the rest of her life. The heir says she just needs to remember he is her master and nothing more. Happily, the girl agrees, saying she will remember that forever. But the prince turns away, thinking he's afraid she will forget her master. Looking back, he sees her eyes shining in a very strange and frightening way. Days later, a knight announces that Bernardo Eli was mentioned by his highness. The man says he is being held as a witness, and no one can see him before the trial. The young man asks if he will have to go to the trial, and the guard says royalty does not testify. With a relieved smile, the young man celebrates that he at least managed to escape that. He complains they are exaggerating things, but the maid just watches him in silence. The heir then asks Adelia how she has been doing for the past few days at the palace. He wants to know if her mana heart has stabilized, and the young woman confirms. Satisfied, the prince stands up, saying from today on, she will train with him. With a smile, he tells the young woman to go change her clothes and meet him in the training yard. The young man tells her to drop the cloth because she is now a real knight. In the training yard, the heir to the throne begins to stretch. His uncle then questions what he is doing, and the young man seems very annoyed. The young man says he is warming up, but the man reveals he is not talking to him. With that, he points to the new apprentice running desperately around the yard. The prince asks if he hasn't heard the rumors, saying he is going to make her a knight. The older man then shouts, asking if being a knight is such a trivial thing. He calls him reckless, and the young man freaks out, asking why he has become so meddlesome. The heir says since his uncle hates him so much, why does he keep coming here? At that moment, the young woman falls to the ground, announcing she has finished the 10 laps. The prince and his uncle just watch the exhausted and panting girl on the ground. The young woman apologizes, but he tells her to forget it and pick up the wooden sword. With a confident smile, the young man says today he will teach the basic sword stance. He then demonstrates the position and how to swing the sword with mana flowing. The girl is shocked by the demonstration, and the heir tells her to try to do the same. With difficulty, the young woman tries to imitate the posture, asking if she is doing it right. But suddenly, an intense golden glow appears in the future knight's eyes. The young woman then executes the movement perfectly, and a bluish energy appears. The protagonist's uncle is completely shocked by what he has just witnessed. The heir to the throne is also astonished, thinking she imitated him after seeing it only once. The girl asks if the posture was correct, and he tells her to wait a minute. With a panicked look, he thinks if he slips up, she will surpass him soon. The young man remembers her mentality as one of submission, and he is anxious because of the past. He then imagines being surpassed by her, a sword pointed at his neck. With a serious expression, the prince seems to think about that girl's future. His uncle smiles, thinking to possess that level of talent, she is a prodigy. The older man then approaches and asks his nephew what he is doing. The protagonist turns with a serious look and tells his uncle not to covet the girl. With a smile, the man asks what he could possibly do for that child. He adds that the young man is a novice who has only held a sword for a few months. Shrouded in a blue aura, his uncle says the prince can't handle her. The heir to the throne feels the immense pressure of his uncle's aura, but does not back down. With a serious look, he says if he were the old scoundrel, he would be trembling in fear now. But he states he is no longer that person, and if he can't handle her, an immense blue energy explodes from his chest, showing all his hidden power. The young man adds that then no one else can, because he is the only one capable. He then remembers he was once the king of the giants and the mad dragon who drank blood. And with that, he reveals he is actually the reincarnated demonic sword Gruhorn itself. A status window announces part of his soul has been revealed, and his eyes turn red. Shrouded in a malevolent aura, the young man faces his relative with a threatening look. The older man is shocked, beginning to sweat profusely from his nephew's energy. With the red aura, he warns that the girl is his and tells his uncle not to covet her. He shouts that he hates it when someone tries to take what belongs to him. The two face each other in the training yard while the young woman watches from a distance. Suddenly, the young man feels something strange, and his vision starts to get very blurry. His consciousness is taken to a dark, deep place like the bottom of the ocean. He begins to sink, realizing his sense of reality is slowly disappearing. The young man feels only cold and darkness, wondering if this is a bad sign. He then sees the image of the sword Gruhorn covered in a malevolent, dark aura. The heir realizes his weak body will be devoured by the soul of the demonic sword. With that, several dark hands grab him, trying to pull him into total darkness. He thinks this is his end, that he will be consumed by his own power. But the young man reaches out his hand, and a bluish aura appears to protect him from the darkness. He then manages to break free from the sword's malevolent influence and regains control. Back in reality, the prince faces his uncle with an expression of pure determination. The heir says an ordinary knight can save the lives of only 10 soldiers. But his uncle shouts that an exceptional knight can save the lives of 100. The man adds that this girl might be able to save 1,000 or even more people. The young man then understands his uncle's conviction and the reason he has been there all along. His relative is the great commander who oversees the kingdom's northern borders. But the young man says none of that matters, seeming to completely ignore the warning. The uncle shouts that even if she could save many people, but the young woman interrupts him. With her hand on her chest, she says her body and soul already belong entirely to the prince. The older man is then left completely speechless by the young woman's loyalty. The heir smiles, thinking it was worth it, as her mentality binds her to him. He then says his uncle has nothing more to teach him, since the goal was just to lose weight. The young man warns that if his uncle wants to keep visiting, he'd better not meddle anymore. With a defeated expression, the older man just says he understands the situation. But even after that day, the uncle continued to visit the palace to watch over Adelia. The prince is amused to see his arrogant uncle squirming, unable to do anything. During training, the girl's wooden sword begins to glow with a golden energy. With a determined look, the young woman wields the blade, which shines brightly in her hands. The uncle is completely shocked and speechless at what is happening. The heir wonders if she has already mastered the sword's name so quickly. With a nervous smile, he congratulates her, thinking she is so fast she might catch up to him. The young woman then approaches, facing him with an expression of pure admiration and happiness. The uncle turns to his nephew and asks if he also taught her about the man of heart. The young man confirms and asks if there is anything wrong, and the man grinds his teeth in anger. He then shouts it wasn't enough for him to learn cheap tricks, he had to teach her too. With a cold look, the heir to the throne just stares at his uncle in complete silence. Without patience, the young man turns to the older man and tells him to leave. The uncle shouts she had immense potential, and the prince ruined everything with his tricks. The heir then calls Carls and tells him to escort his uncle out of the training yard. But the man says it's fine and that he will leave on his own. With that, the count turns and begins to walk away, leaving everyone behind. The young woman then turns to her master, asking if what she learned is really a cheap trick. The young man denies it immediately, telling her it is definitely not just any trick. She asks why the count said that, and he replies it's because he knows nothing. The prince explains the people of this era have forgotten what a true man of heart is. He adds that if they hadn't forgotten, they wouldn't have discarded it like trash. The young man then says she will soon discover the true power of the man of heart. But suddenly, a bluish energy strikes the ground, and his uncle returns to the yard. With his arms crossed, the heir to the throne just stares at him in silence and without surprise. He asks if he thought he wouldn't come back, and the man tells his nephew to prove his worth. His uncle says he will use a single ring, and if the young man pushes him back, he will acknowledge him. The young man then holds his sword and asks about the bet they made in the past. With a smile, he remembers if he won, he would be entitled to a special wish. The man confirms, saying if he wins, he can even ask for the family's secret techniques. The young man refuses with a smile, saying he doesn't want that as he prepares to fight. With his sword in hand, he charges forward, shouting for the combat to begin. His uncle smiles, saying his nephew has been aiming for his neck since the beginning. He adds that the young man's sword remains as cruel and merciless as ever. With a swift movement, the heir delivers a powerful blow with his wooden sword. With his eyes glowing blue, the young man focuses completely on his next attack. The exchange of blows is intense, and the prince attacks with surprising speed. The blue energy from his uncle's blade cuts through the air with a sharp, threatening sound. The two wooden swords clash with incredible force in the middle of the yard, but the older man blocks him easily and asks if that's all he has. With a sweaty face, the young man seems surprised by his opponent's immense strength. The heir is then thrown back and has to support himself on the ground to avoid falling. His uncle approaches and asks with a smile if he has by any chance given up. The young man replies, "No way," and admits to himself his uncle is quite annoying. He thinks his relative is strong and is just waiting for him to use his mana. With that, he would deliver an even more humiliating defeat, and the young man knows he will lose. But with a confident smile, the protagonist asks if that isn't quite strange. His uncle is confused, and the young man says that 400 years ago, things were different. In a flashback, we see countless knights fighting monsters and dragons. Those warriors of the past managed to perform unbelievable feats in battle. But because of a new technique, their skills were treated like trash. Everyone thinks the mana chain is much more powerful than the mana heart. His uncle asks what he means, and the young man says he thinks differently. The young man says the mana heart wasn't weak, but its master was, because not all are the same. With a smile, the young man calls his uncle and asks if he has ever heard of a saga. The older man scolds him, saying this is a place for fighting, not for talking. The heir to the throne smiles, saying he figured he would say something like that. He accuses him of calling the mana heart a low-level skill and of talking too much. His uncle asks if he needs more time, but the young man says no, and his eyes glow. The protagonist says the path a knight walks becomes a great achievement. He then adds his 100 victories are his pride and also his great strength. His uncle is confused, and a status window sings about the 100 victories against 20 apprentices. The system continues, saying achievements are engraved in the warrior's heart. These engraved achievements transform into a saga as the system announces its creation. With this, a normal grade combat poem is created inhabiting the knight's blade. The poem's effect is activated, and he thinks about the small achievement of the last 6 months. With his sword glowing, he reveals this is the true power of the mana heart, the saga. As the poem's effect activates, his uncle says no matter what he does, it will be the same. He warns that as long as the young man has a mana heart, he cannot defeat the mana chain. But the heir to the throne just stares at him with glowing eyes and prepares to attack. The young man then advances with his bluish aura, attacking his uncle with all his strength. A window explains the mana of the rings has the property of reversing the mana of the heart. With this, the protagonist begins to feel the effect of his uncle's mana on his body. The older man then smiles confidently upon seeing his technique is working. His uncle says he is resisting stubbornly, but the young man continues attacking nonstop. However, the heir to the throne continues to fight with a serious and determined expression. He remembers training over 100 times and enduring the mana of the rings over 1,000 times. Competing 100 times, he endured 1,000 waves of power to obtain that skill. With that, an immense bluish energy concentrates in his sword and body. He then reveals this is the power of the combat stance he trained so much for. The young man's wooden blade glows with an intense, powerful blue light. With a smile, the young man says that now the fight is finally worth fighting. That said, he advances, and a great impact occurs on the training yard floor. The wooden swords clash, and the uncle faces his nephew with a very serious expression. The young man then moves in the air, attacking with a speed that impresses his opponent. With a confident smile, the young man continues his attacks, enveloped by a blue mana aura. The older man is surprised, wondering how he is managing to last so long. The blades meet again, and a large spark of energy illuminates the training yard. With a swift movement, the uncle blocks another of the heir's attacks with his wooden sword. The prince is then thrown back but slides across the ground without losing his combat stance. He faces his relative with determination, his blue aura shining brighter than before. His uncle asks how this is possible, and the young man says he had already warned him about his power. Enveloped in his energy, the man says not all mana hearts are the same and calls him arrogant. With that, he stomps hard on the ground, preparing to show his true strength. The two advance, and an immense wave of blue energy spreads with the clash of the blades. A large explosion occurs, and the prince is thrown far away, coughing a little. His uncle tells them to stop the games, admitting it was impressive how long he lasted. He praises him, but Adrian thinks a normal rank saga wasn't enough to win. On his knees, the young man hears his uncle say that 400 years ago, things were different. With a serious face, the young man says the knights of the past made a big mistake. We see a hero on a pile of monsters, and the young man says they left no enemies behind. In the past, knights had brilliant sword techniques and sagas that were passed down. But over time, these great achievements were lost and fell into oblivion. Songs about never-before-seen dragons and giant kings became just legends. In the end, all the stories of the great heroes became just empty, powerless myths. New sagas were created, but they were just victories against 10 knights or 100 soldiers. Because of this, these new sagas could not overcome the new power that was emerging. The young man says with a simple technique like the mana chain, one does not reach transcendence. His uncle asks if he has been drinking, because he doesn't understand anything the hare is saying. The young man then calls him by his full name, Baal Balahard, with a very serious look. With a blue and red aura, he calls him a foolish knight, saying he needs to know something. A malevolent red energy appears as he says his uncle needs to know how much he has lost. Adrian is enveloped in a dark aura, saying if he doesn't know he will show him. The malevolent aura envelopes his wooden sword, and he says he will inform his uncle about the lost power. With the energy of the dragon slayer, he talks about cutting a dragon's scales. He says he drinks the warm blood of the creature that no precious sword could pierce. A status window announces he is singing the poem of the dragon slayer. But the system warns his current ability cannot handle the rank of that battle poem. With that, several status windows appear, warning that parts of the poem have been omitted. The system then says he sang only a single verse, which is half of the poem. Even so, he prepares himself and uses the technique to cut the dragon's scales with his sword. With his eyes glowing red, the hare charges against his relative with all his might. The blade of dark energy strikes the older man's defense with incredible force. His uncle's wooden sword begins to break, and he wonders what kind of power this is. He realizes if he continues like this, he will surely be consumed by the malevolent energy. With no choice, the older man unleashes the power of all his mana rings at once. The clash of the two auras creates a gigantic explosion that destroys the entire courtyard. The heir to the throne is thrown far away, and Adelia screams desperately for her master. When the dust settles, the protagonist's uncle appears standing amidst the debris. Lying on the ground, the young man faces his opponent with a tired but unyielding expression. He then asks if his uncle hadn't said he would only use a single ring in the fight. With a sweaty face, the man thinks that even using the 4 rings he possessed, he couldn't prevent his wooden sword from being completely cut in half. The protagonist remains seated on the ground, looking exhausted after the great battle. His uncle thinks the mana of the heart is inferior to the mana of the rings, and that is a truth. With a serious look, the heir to the throne then calls his relative by his full name. The man stares at him in shock, and the young man says with a victorious smile that he lost. Suddenly, the young man has a vision of his former self as the demonic sword Gruhorn. The sword's consciousness screams for him to stop, as it can no longer bear the immense pain. The young man is then terrified by the pain and power he felt at that moment. With his hand on his chest, he feels an agonizing pain in his newly created mana heart. In his room, he falls onto the bed and writhes in pain, unable to control himself. With his hand on the sheets, the prince seems to be suffering greatly from the power's effects. Sweating profusely, the prince complains about that cursed saga he used in battle. He explains this is the price for having used the saga's power by force. The Dragon Slayer's poem is a mythical level and very powerful saga. He says his body is in pieces, but it was worth paying the price. That was the first saga he created with his own hands, using his pride. He endured 1,000 waves of power and 100 battles to obtain that skill. And because of that, he will continue to stand against stronger waves, as the system announces the improvement. With a smile, he says that's enough to deal with the third prince. Just then, a maid appears, saying His Highness has finally woken up. The young woman says the palace has been in chaos and the queen was very furious. The young man says it serves them right, and the maid warns the count left clear orders. He wanted to be notified the exact moment the prince regained consciousness. But the young man stops her, saying not to tell anything because he wants to rest a little longer. With a worried expression, he seems to be thinking about the consequences of his actions. He thinks if he doesn't heal his spirit, he will pay a very high price. Memories of the past and present mix, and the barrier of reality breaks. He would be trapped in a fragmented world, reliving the moments of the saga forever. The hare thinks he barely became human just to be trapped in the sword's memories again. He then remembers the hero in Agnes Bayern, a great swordswoman in the past. The young man says since Adelia is her descendant, she might inherit the saga the heroine left behind. The young woman is shocked, saying she didn't know her ancestor was an incredible swordswoman. The young man warns she needs to evolve a lot to be worthy of inheriting that power. With a serious look, he then asks what she wants to do when she learns to fight. The maid gets nervous, not knowing what to answer her master at that moment. She then begins to stutter, saying if she could really become a knight. The young woman gets even more nervous and can't finish the sentence out of embarrassment. The hare tells her to think about it and tell him later, and the woman agrees and starts to walk away. But she stops suddenly, and the prince looks at her confused, not understanding what happened. With a determined look, she swears she will become His Highness's sword forever. The young man is completely shocked and speechless at the young woman's unexpected response. The narrator explains some sagas begin with the sound of a war horn on the field. Others begin with the first step taken on a vast, desolate battlefield. And there are still other stories that begin with an oath made from the bottom of the heart. She swears to live for Her Highness and dedicate everything to him forever with all her soul. A status window announces Adelia has offered a poem, and he wonders if it's her saga. The young man then thinks sometimes a saga can even influence other people. With that, a new saga is created, and a tree of golden light appears in his room. The system then informs a common grade poem of domination was created in the process. The poem of loyalty is a hymn dedicated to a master, a vow that unites two souls. He thinks the descendant of the Sword Queen wove the poem even with her servile nature. With his hands glowing gold, he wonders if he received some unexpected help from the young woman. With a smile, he realizes that as the target of the new knight's poem of loyalty, Adelia's growth will now also benefit him, and she seems happy with her master. With a sincere smile, the heir to the throne then thanks the young woman for her great loyalty. The young woman's face blushes, and she calls for Her Highness, not knowing what to say. The young man then thinks it remains to be seen what kind of benefits this will bring him. Some days later, in the Grand Royal Palace, the atmosphere seems very tense and heavy. Sitting in his chair, the prince faces everyone with a sore expression. With him are Arwen Kurgan and his newest personal knight, Adelia Bayern. His mother approaches and asks if he is feeling better, and the young man confirms. He thinks it's much easier to deal with people who despise his current body, but he thinks people like his mother, who like the previous owner, are a pain. The queen then turns to her son, asking if he by any chance holds a grudge against his uncle. She says his uncle never meant to hurt him and it's time to forgive, but he denies feeling any grudge. The woman freaks out, saying it's a lie, but the young man insists he holds no grudge. With a bored look, he thinks he already dealt a fatal blow to his uncle that day. He shattered his relative's pride and truths, and he must be suffering from it. What he planted in his uncle that day was a very powerful and dark inner demon. If the man has the strength to overcome it, he will become stronger. If he fails, he will lose everything. The queen then explains his uncle has always been closer to the sword than to people. The queen reveals his uncle even tried to convince the king in his favor during a conversation. The young man is shocked, and the woman explains his sentence ended early thanks to him. The heir thinks the mess he caused put his uncle in a very bad situation. With his hand on his chin, the prince seems thoughtful about the recent revelations. He then wonders why on earth that man would do anything good for him after all. At that moment, an old scholar named Niccolo Marciato arrives and greets him. With a sour look, the young man shouts that he refuses to have lessons with him. His two knights just watch the scene in silence, a little surprised. The prince throws himself on the floor, and the old man says without learning, there is no difference between a man and a beast. The heir freaks out, asking if the old man called him a beast, but he denies it with a smile. Sitting on the floor, the young man says he already knows everything and doesn't need to learn anymore. The scholar then smiles, saying if he feels that way, they can do something else. He proposes a conversation, and if the young man is as good as he says, he will never come back. With a mischievous smile, the heir to the throne accepts the proposal immediately. He slams the table with force, shouting this is exactly why one must act. The young man says one must watch their back because people try to take advantage. The man then hands him a book, saying His Highness will find it very interesting. The book describes the relationship between a ruler and a subject as a contract. The young man says they now speak the same language because everything is an exchange of favors. The two continue their conversation about the book as the sun sets on the horizon. The scholar then holds his books, preparing to end the day's lesson. With a smile on his face, the prince claps his hands, looking very satisfied. He says to save the rest of the story for the next day, and that he will be waiting. But the young man is confused, wondering if that wasn't just a normal lesson. With a mischievous smile, he seems to have realized the old man's true intention. He thinks that old scholar is very clever and fooled him completely. The man then walks away, thinking the first prince is very different from the rumors. On a sunny and peaceful day at the royal palace, things seem calm. But lying upside down on the bed, the heir to the throne seems very bored. He then turns over, complaining to Arwen that he is dying of boredom with nothing to do. Lying in his bed, the prince wonders if he has lived too intensely in the past few days. Just then, a maid announces his uncle Bael Balahard has arrived, and the young man is surprised. With an excited smile, he tells the young woman to let his relative into the room. The heir thinks it's been a few days since the fight, and was about time he showed up. But upon looking at his uncle, the young man realizes something is very different about him. With a dark aura, the man stares at his nephew, who notices he hasn't overcome his inner demon. The older man then remains completely silent, unable to say a single word. With a defeated expression, he finally apologizes, leaving the young man very surprised. He admits he broke his promise and caused a great injury without any excuse. The prince thinks he wasn't hurt by the aura blade but by using the dragon's poem. He remembers his mother saying his uncle's position became difficult because of the commotion. The older man then faces him and asks him to say what his wish is. His uncle offers his arm or eye, but the young man says he wants none of that. The young man thinks in the old days his uncle would be a master, but now he is trapped by a demon. With a sigh, the heir to the throne then says he will be generous with his request. With a serious expression, the prince prepares to finally state his wish. He then turns to his relative and asks to be allowed to leave the palace for a while. The man asks if his confinement isn't over and why he can't leave whenever he wants. With a smile, the young man says he doesn't want a day trip but wants to go far from the capital. His uncle remains silent for a moment, seeming to think about his nephew's request. He warns it will take time to arrange everything, and the young man says that's no problem. The man then agrees, saying he will get in touch as soon as everything is ready. After the conversation, the prince and his knight stand in silence in the room. He then turns to the young woman, asking why she is staring at him that way. With a smile, she says it was unexpected and that she thought he would ask for something more absurd. The young man says since the count broke his promise, it was a rare opportunity. But he adds it's pathetic to see that old man acting in such a strange way. The knight starts to laugh and the young man freaks out, asking why she is so relaxed. At that moment, Adelia calls him and the heir to the throne asks what she wants. With a smile, the young woman hands him a letter, saying it's the one His Highness was waiting for. The young man then takes the letter with a red seal and opens it to read. In it, the knight says she has achieved a small accomplishment and is seen enveloped in blue energy. The young woman says she believes she can visit him soon and hopes he stays well. With a smile, the young man reads Arwen's signature, thinking this is great news. 5 days later, his uncle sends good news, and 2 more pass before their departure. From the carriage, the heir excitedly asks his uncle which fief they are passing through. The older man looks at him irritated, saying he can't stay still for a second. His uncle then tells his nephew to get back inside and says he will explain everything. He reveals they are passing through the county of Alin, the best weaponsmithing location in the kingdom. The place has an iron mine and a blacksmith's guild to refine the material. His uncle adds that half of the royal family's weapons come from there, and the young man celebrates excitedly. With a smile, the heir thinks since his level has gone up, it's time to get a sword. He remembers planning to get one from the royal armory, but an order from the king forbade it. The young man looks shocked as he remembers the ban he received from the sovereign. He thinks because of his past, he now has to find a weapon outside the palace. With a determined look, the prince seems to already have a plan in mind to solve this. His relative watches him, thinking for someone who doesn't look it, the young man is quite delicate. The 20-day journey begins and his uncle tells his nephew to close the window as it's distracting. The map shows the journey includes a stop in the county of Ellen, 3 days from the capital. After resting, the plan is to return to the capital, but the heir is bored. The young man complains he's been stuck in the carriage for 3 days without moving a single muscle. He thinks Adelia in front of him is no fun and only answers yes or no. With a sigh of boredom, the prince seems completely frustrated with the long journey. He then wonders if he should check his mana heart to pass the time. The young man remembers his heart is empty from using the dragon's poem, but he thinks it's about time to start slowly replenishing his energy. With the rocking of the carriage, he begins to feel the mana particles around him. The cool breeze passing by also carries the energy he needs to absorb. Even the voices of the knights outside seem to carry a bit of mana. With that, he gathers all the particles, beginning to fill his empty mana heart. Suddenly, he is surprised to see an immense sphere of blue energy in front of him. The young man then wonders when his mana heart managed to get that big. A window announces he attempted a miracle and therefore saw a part of a great will. The system then informs the effects were reflected, and his mana heart has expanded. With that, his physical constitution has changed, and his body can now handle much more mana. The status window then informs him he has finally reached the expert level. His connection to the source has improved, and some restrictions on his powers have been lifted. His third eye and third ear powers have also greatly improved with the change. Adelia then calls him by his title, and the young man finally opens his eyes in the carriage. Looking like a two-headed figure, he seems to shake off the effects of the great power he felt. With a confident smile, the young man celebrates taking another step toward his goals. The carriage then finally arrives at its first destination, the county of Ellen. A man approaches, saying he cannot express the honor of receiving him there. Edgar of the Ellen family and his son Torrance formally introduce themselves to the prince. The heir thanks them for the reception, and the man says he will take him to his quarters. As he walks, the young man looks around, seeming to analyze every detail of the mansion. He thinks the mansion is full of weapons, but they all seem useless in a fight. The group continues walking down the hallway, and the young man observes all the decorations. With a disappointed look, he thinks it will be hard to find what he's looking for there. Curious, the protagonist asks Edgar if the blacksmith's guild is on the territory. With an affirmative answer, the heir to the throne says he would like to take a look at the place. The prince then starts walking towards the guild along with the family's leader. The man warns him the blacksmiths are stubborn and have a very difficult temperament. He continues, saying they even ignore the lord, and their words are as cold as iron. Edgar then asks the prince to be patient and consider their artisan spirit. At the guild, the heat from the forge is intense, and the sound of metal echoes everywhere. The man tells the young man to say if the heat becomes too much for him to bear. The air is filled with the sound of hammers hitting iron from all directions. Edgar then calls for his highness, but the young man seems completely focused on something else. Flames roar and bellows pant as the prince watches everything attentively. As the blacksmiths strike the iron, an old artisan stands out among them all. Among all the sounds of the forge, the prince seems to notice something very different and special. He then realizes one of the hammering sounds is unique and much clearer than the others. The heir to the throne then approaches the artisan, who continues his work at the forge. With focused eyes, the old blacksmith strikes the metal with incredible force and precision. The young man then realizes what is happening, his eyes shining with the fire of the forge. With this, he remembers this is his first memory from when he was still a sword. Overcome with emotion, the young man begins to cry and Adelia approaches with a cloth. The young woman then tells him he is sweating too much, looking worried about his highness. The prince just stares at her without saying anything as the young woman continues to dry his face. With a sour look, the heir seems a little annoyed by the situation. Meanwhile, the hustle and bustle in the guild continues, and the old artisan does not stop his work. The other blacksmiths then bow, offering their greetings to Prince Idran. Idgar then introduces Sachsen, the man in charge of that blacksmith's guild. The guild leader then shouts at the old man, who continues to work nonstop at his station. Angrily, the man tells the artisan to stop and greet his highness like everyone else. But the prince interrupts him, telling him to be silent with an irritated expression. The other blacksmiths are frightened by the heir's attitude and don't know what to do. The blade that was being forged now rests on the anvil as chaos ensues. The young man says they were dragged there and that he didn't ask for this reception. With a cold look, he warns the iron is cooling and the forge will go out. The other blacksmiths despair, rushing to grab their tools and get back to work. With his arms crossed, the young man then just watches the scene in silence and calmly. He continues to stand in the same spot, seeming to wait for something important to happen. The old artisan then continues his work with the same intensity as before. The hammer starts striking again, and the sound of metal echoes throughout the guild. The prince then goes back to watching the old artisan with an expression of pure admiration. The fire of the forge reflects in his eyes, and he seems completely mesmerized. Surrounded by the flames, the young man feels at home, remembering his past as a sword. The blade glows with intense heat, and the artisan's work continues without interruption. The young man watches the old blacksmith working amidst the flames of the forge. With a sweaty face, he wonders what kind of strange sensation this is. Edgar explains for the past 6 months, the artisan has been making and melting swords nonstop. The prince then asks if the swords are flawed, and the man seems to think on the answer. It is revealed every sword he makes is a masterpiece, and he is the master swordsmith. Edgar says to him the swords had no defects, and it's a mystery why he melts them. Furthermore, he says for a month the blacksmith has barely slept, dedicated only to his work. The man adds that since the artisan is not young, their concern is quite great. As he walks away, the heir to the throne thinks this man is a true artisan. Several days pass, the prince goes to the forge in the morning and only leaves at night. During all this time, the old blacksmith continued his daily work without rest. And with his arms crossed, the young man just watched him in complete silence. Edgar thinks that contrary to his expectations, there were no incidents during those days. Night falls over the mansion and the crescent moon shines brightly in the starry sky. The day of the prince's departure finally arrives, and the blacksmith continues his work. The heir to the throne watches him in silence with a slightly melancholic expression. With a sweaty face, the old artisan seems completely focused on finishing his great work. The young man then looks away, thinking he was hoping to see the sword finished before leaving. Edgar just watches the scene in silence, not knowing what to say to the young prince. With a sad look, the heir to the throne feels a deep regret at that moment. He then turns, says he has to go. There is a party, and he leaves at dawn. Edgar thinks perhaps that's why he was hoping the master would finish the sword in time. But suddenly, a voice shouts desperately, calling for his highness in the mansion's courtyard. The prince then turns in surprise, seeming not to understand what is happening. Edgar's son runs up, announcing the master blacksmith has finally finished the sword. With a shocked expression, the young man and Adelia look towards the forge, speechless. Outside, the old artisan holds the newly forged sword against the setting sun. With a cloth in hand, the man then cleans the blade with great care and admiration. He then holds the sword, which shines brightly in the late afternoon sunlight. The artisan then kneels before the prince, offering him his great masterpiece. His own reflection appears on the blade as the blacksmith says this sword is for him. With shining eyes, the young man then grips the hilt of the sword the artisan offers. Everyone around is completely shocked by the scene they are witnessing. The blacksmith's song is recited about heating metal like the sun and cooling it like the night. The song continues, saying the color of the blade should match the king's purple robes. The poem ends, saying thus, a sword like the sun and like the king will finally be born. With the sword in hand, the young man asks the artisan if the weapon has a special name. The old man then suggests it be called Diamemerung, which means twilight in another language. He says for him it is twilight, but for his highness, it will probably be the dawn. The heir to the throne laughs, saying for a blacksmith he has excellent eloquence. With a tired smile, the old artisan just seems relieved by the young man's words. But suddenly, the man faints, and the prince catches him before he hits the ground. With the blacksmith's body in his arms, the young man seems completely exhausted and weak. The young man then asks them to inform his uncle he will need to spend the night there. That same night, knights stand guard outside the prince's tent. Inside the tent, the heir watches the old artisan sleeping on a makeshift bed. The man says when the prince stood behind him, the sword took shape as if by destiny. The young man asks if he really believes the sword itself chose the day of its birth. With a smile, the young man approaches, seeming ready to reveal a great secret. He then whispers something in the old artisan's ear that leaves him completely shocked. With wide eyes, the blacksmith is speechless at what he has just heard. The prince confirms, saying that's why he was able to understand the artisan's heart. With tears in his eyes, the man seems to have finally found the piece he was searching for. With a serene smile, he says he finally understands everything and closes his eyes to rest. The old man then asks for the sword for a moment, and the young man looks at him, not understanding why. The prince hands over the sword, and the blacksmith holds it with both hands very firmly. He grips the hilt of the blade tightly, seeming to say goodbye to his great masterpiece. The man then tells the sword to become as great as its new master forever. The heir to the throne then takes the weapon back, and the artisan hands it over willingly. With the sword in hand, the young man just watches the blacksmith on his bed in silence. With the sword in hand, the young man promises it will surely become as great as he is. He then turns, facing the darkness of the night with a serious and determined expression. Sitting beside the bed, the young man continues to watch over the old artisan's sleep until the end. The man then finally rests in peace with a serene smile on his tired face. Outside the tent, the prince promises the sword will certainly be honored. The next day, Edgar appears with a sword in a box and offers it to the prince. He says the value of a sword made with soul is priceless, but it is inconvenient. The man then reveals he has a magical sword to give as a gift to his highness. With a mischievous smile, the young man says even though it's not high quality, it's decent. The young man adds the master's sword is already a great gift, but the other one is incredible. Edgar is embarrassed by the compliment, saying his family's loyalty is exceptional. The heir to the throne thinks he used the magical sword as bait to get the masters. On the road, the prince's uncle announces the cavalry will go ahead as fast as possible. He then tells the soldiers to hurry up because the schedule is very behind. The man turns to his nephew, saying he seems to be very busy lately. His uncle reveals he received separate instructions from the king, which is why he was away for a while. With a smile, the young man thinks his little excursion wasn't for nothing in the end. His uncle tells him to get ready because they will ride to the castle and arrive at night. But the young man interrupts him, saying with a shocked face that he doesn't know how to ride a horse. The older man is speechless at the revelation, staring at him in disbelief. The young man thinks since he was a sword, how could he have learned to ride a horse? On the way to the Iron Lion's fortress, Adele helps the prince, who is feeling sick. After many problems and a furious horse, the heir seems to finally calm down. But even after many setbacks and an angry horse, he doesn't give up trying. With a tired face, the prince seems to have finally managed to tame the wild animal. Although not in the planned time, they manage to reach their destination in half a day. With an exhausted expression, the young man finally arrives at the famous Iron Lion's fortress. The knights then dismount their horses and prepare to enter the large castle. A man named York introduces himself and greets the prince and the noble lineage of Leonberg. With a wick smile, the heir to the throne thinks this man has a lot of audacity. The reason for the knight's attitude is obvious, and they stare at the heir with hostility. Arwen then thinks the reaction of everyone there is completely predictable to her. The protagonist's uncle wonders how they will respond and then calls for Arwen. The knight turns to the prince, greeting him with a very serious expression. She then kneels, saying she has waited a long time for the day to see him again. The other knights are furious, and the young man finds their immediate reaction amusing. He thinks their hostility might provoke Adelia and then calls her by name. With shining eyes, the young woman assumes a threatening posture, startling the prince. But soon after, she returns to normal, seeming completely confused by what she did. The young man thinks it was wise to cultivate her servile mentality to be able to control her. With a smile on his face, the heir then tells the young woman to proceed with their plan. He turns to Arwen, calling for her to go with him, while the others stare at him with hatred. The young man says they have much to discuss, and if the others join in, it will be much better. In the training yard, the heir to the throne holds a wooden sword on his shoulder. He faces the knights, asking who will show him the famous sword of the Iron Lions. The warriors are paralyzed, not knowing how to react to the prince's challenge. The young man faces their silence, saying if his position makes them hesitant to fight. With a smile, he swears no one will be punished and asks if there are any volunteers. He then provokes them, saying perhaps their fame is a rumor and they are cowards. A red-haired knight gets angry, introducing himself as Dale of House Dennett and accepting the challenge. The young man says he is not worthy to represent the Iron Lions, but if he is permitted. He adds he would dare to fight his highness to defend the honor of his order. But the prince says he doesn't need permission, because he was the one who asked for the fight. With a war cry, the red-haired knight charges forward with impressive speed. The heir to the throne just watches him approach with a calm and confident expression. With a single movement, he blocks the knight's attack, who is using a mana aura. Dale is completely shocked, his face bleeding, not understanding what happened. With a blow from his wooden sword, the protagonist throws his opponent far away. The young man faces the others, and with his mana heart glowing, he calls for the next one. The other knights are speechless, seeing their comrade defeated on the ground. A new knight introduces himself as Paul Rothheim, saying Dale was just a rookie. But with a single blow, the prince defeats him easily without any effort. Other knights like Harley and Judith are also defeated one by one in the courtyard. The protagonist dodges several blows, showing his great agility in combat. The fight continues for a good while, and the knights can't land a hit on the hare. The young man then stands amidst several defeated knights on the courtyard floor. With a bored look, the prince seems completely disappointed with his opponents. The other knights comment that they wanted to fight, but seem afraid to challenge him. The heir to the throne then turns and calls for Arwen, who looks at him in surprise. With a smile, he informs her that when he returns, she must go with him to another place. The knight remains silent for a moment, seeming to understand what he means. She then bows, saying she will do everything as His Highness wishes in the end. A white-haired knight observes, and the prince thinks it was too easy. The man approaches, saying he heard the prince likes bets and suggests one. He then proposes that if he can defeat His Highness, the prize will be Arwen. The protagonist interrupts him immediately, saying that is completely impossible. He warns that Arwen is not a tournament prize, and the young woman is surprised. The knight suggests another bet, and the prince calls Carls to bring him a sword. With the weapon in hand, the young man says if the knight wins the fight, he has a prize. He then reveals if the man defeats him, he will give him that beautiful sword. Arwen is completely shocked by the great value of the prize for that bet. The white-haired knight is also surprised by the hare's proposal. The young woman tries to intervene, saying perhaps she should fight in His Highness's place. But the young man stops her, saying she is worth 100 or 1,000 times more than that sword. He adds that the value of a sword saint does not compare to a simple blade. With a smile, the knight accepts the proposal and prepares for the great showdown. He introduces himself as Dunham of Fahrenheit, an elite knight of the Royal Order. But the prince scoffs, saying that means he isn't that strong. The man gets angry, saying his sword was made by a great bladesmith. With a smile, the young man says that is a great coincidence between them. The hare reveals this is the master's 100th work, and the knight is shocked. The young man explains it was the final work, and the man accepts the challenge, preparing to fight. With a bluish aura, he says the prince is walking a mistaken path with his sword. He promises to fight with all his might, and the hare scoffs at the comment about his path. With his mana heart glowing, the prince seems to concentrate for the great combat. He then calls his opponent's words petty and prepares for the attack. The young man says that position was never his to claim, and Adelia is surprised. He adds that any honor directed at him is not truly his. With shining eyes, he says the honor should belong to his people instead. The young man then turns to Adelia, telling her to watch very carefully. With that, an immense blue aura in the shape of a knight completely envelopes the prince. He says this is the path the young woman must walk from that moment on. Adelia and Arwen watch the scene, and the new knight agrees with her master. An intense golden energy then explodes from the young woman's body, who seems inspired. With a determined look, she promises she will do everything Her Highness commands. The scene then changes, and we see a teacup on a table in a luxurious place. A man asks another how many times they have visited the fortress, and he answers 4. With a worried look, the man seems to be thinking about something very serious. It is revealed all the other princes have visited the place except for the 4th. The man then complains that even with his bad reputation, the first prince is the legitimate heir. An old noble interrupts him, shouting he bears a large part of the blame for what happened. He says if the man had supported the prince, he would not have become so isolated. The man defends himself, thinking he already pushed his nephew away once for a good reason. In a flashback, we see the former overweight and drunk prince who would be a tyrant in the future. The uncle remembers when he scolded his nephew for being drunk on a strange potion. With his face red with anger, the former prince did not like being scolded. In a fit of rage, he attacked his own uncle with an unsheathed sword. The man remembers seeing the reflection of a hopeless brute in his nephew's eyes. When he returned to the north, the young man sent him poisoned wine as a gift. With a clenched fist, the man remembers the hatred he felt holding that bottle. He remembers drinking the wine and burning the cheap poison with his own mana. With that, he also burned the last blood tie he had with his nephew. But that brute who seemed like he would never change now trains and grows every day. The noble then questions him, asking if he didn't say the prince shouldn't be king. The hare's reflection appears in the teacup, and he thinks the young man is a different person. With a serious look, the man asks the noble to give the young man a chance. He then bows, begging the other to reconsider his position on the hare. The noble is shocked, saying he no longer knows if it was the uncle or the prince who changed. The older man just stares at him in silence, seeming very determined with his decision. Suddenly, a knight runs in, shouting desperately for the noble in the room. The man announces the first prince is causing trouble in the training yard. Outside, the uncle tells the noble not to worry because Dunham knows his limits. The other man agrees, saying even in a duel, he wouldn't attack royalty. But the uncle warns the concern should not be the prince, but his knight. The noble is confused, saying he is talking strangely and has changed a lot. Back to the fight, the white-haired knight is thrown to the ground with great force. The two men are shocked to see Dunham has been defeated and is unconscious. Everyone around celebrates the prince's victory, who has won the duel once again. The two nobles are speechless, and the uncle asks if the other hadn't warned him. With a slightly bruised face, the young man wipes away the blood with a serious expression. Enveloped in his aura, he says the worrisome side is not his and calls for the next one. In a flashback, the uncle remembers the test for a knight begins at the second ring. The prince appears panting, his mana heart glowing with an intense blue light. He remembers the saying was no exaggeration upon seeing the knight's speed. With a bruised face, he thinks his current combat poem is not enough. At that moment, a window announces his hyper-focused trait has been activated. With that, all the noise around him disappears, and he becomes completely focused. The knight charges forward with a war cry, ready to deliver the final blow. The young man then feels his body no longer seems to be his and moves on its own. With a blue flame in his eye, he enters a state of pure concentration. He then remembers that same sensation he felt in the past during the fight. The two warriors clash with their blue auras at an incredible speed in the courtyard. An immense explosion of energy occurs, and the impact of the collision is very strong. With that, the white-haired knight is thrown far away, his sword breaking. Panting, the young hare seems to have spent a lot of energy to achieve victory. He then turns to the others and, with a defiant shout, calls for the next opponent. Without rest, the prince immediately moves on to the next fight against another knight. With a confident smile on his face, he seems to be enjoying the battles. The young man prepares to face another warrior, who challenges him in the training yard. The swords clash again in a duel of pure skill and great power. With a focused look, he concentrates completely on his movements to win. The heir to the throne then begins to fight against several opponents at the same time. Even with a few scratches on his face, the young man maintains a determined expression. At sunset, he stands amidst several defeated knights on the ground. Tired and panting, the young man seems to have reached his limit after so many fights. The other knights celebrate that another one has fainted and his highness has won 5 times. He thinks he has endured 1,000 waves of power and will stand firm against a greater one. A window announces a new verse has been added to his poem and that he now rises. With that, the combat poem ranks up, transforming into the dueling poem. With a smile of satisfaction, the young man celebrates that he has finally managed to evolve. But suddenly he falls to his knees, completely exhausted and weak. Carl's approach is concerned, asking if his highness is by any chance okay. With a smile, the escort knight helps him up, offering his respect. All the other knights then shout and salute the prince's great victory. The young man is confused. He thought they wanted to finish him off before the fight. His uncle explains they are simple people who admire strength and courage. The other noble adds for them, there is nothing more exciting than swords and victories. He says from the young man's expression, he expected to receive everyone's resentment. The noble explains an honorable defeat is worth more than a shameful victory to them. One of the knights jokes Dunham might hold a grudge for having to give up his sword. The young man comments it was refreshing, as he boasted too much about his sword. With a smile, he thinks it seemed at least one thing hadn't changed. Indifferent to victory or defeat, they revere the strong, and that pleases him. Days later, the hare and his group prepare to leave the fortress for good. With a smile, the young man says goodbye, hoping to see them again soon. The noble bows and wishes him good health, and the prince tells him to take care as well. But before leaving, the young man turns and calls Count Willowden for one last conversation. He asks to keep everything a secret, and the noble asks if that wouldn't be useful. With a mischievous smile, the heir to the throne seems to have a plan in mind. He reveals he just wants to annoy a certain person, and we see his brother's image. Later, the group stops, and a knight announces they will camp there for the night. Carl then says he will patrol the perimeter, and the prince just agrees. Just then, Adelia appears and stands in silence, observing everything around her. With his arms crossed, he thinks Arwen will adapt to the new routine soon. Yawning, the young man then decides he should also go to his tent to rest. But upon entering, he is met by Adelia, who greets him as if she were his maid. He complains she is an S-rank sword genius but continues to act like a servant. The young woman then asks if there is something that displeases him, and the young man just ignores her. Lying on the bed, the prince says everything is fine and tells the girl to leave. Alone, he thinks the Iron Leia Knights were different from what he expected. Upon using his judgment authority, he saw their talent did not exceed B rank. In the past, even with a lifetime of effort, they would barely reach an intermediate level. But now these individuals become experts with their swords in their 20s or 30s. He concludes the skills of superhumans have declined, but those of ordinary people have risen. With that, the young man sits up, saying that is exactly the function of the mana chain. He remembers his uncle had potential for transcendence, and it was a waste. But in that era, there wasn't even the opportunity to accumulate karma beyond extraordinary status. With a clenched fist, the young man then realizes all of this was just the flow of time. He admits he doesn't know this era very well and decides to learn everything from the beginning. With a determined look, the hare thinks that is a good mentality to have. His uncle appears, saying it's not too late for him to achieve his dream, but the young man is confused. The man explains he has already won over the Iron Lions, something no other prince has done. With a smile, the heir's relative says that was a very wise decision of his. The young man freaks out, wondering what on earth is happening to his uncle all of a sudden. He then shouts, asking if the older man has lost his mind and if he remembers the bet. The young man thinks it's the bet about the third prince, but his relative denies it immediately. He reveals the bet was to defeat a dual chain knight, and Adrian is shocked. Taking a step forward, the man says he will finally fulfill the promise he made. The heir to the throne remains completely confused by the whole situation. His uncle introduces himself as Baal Valorhard, Count of the Kingdom and commander of the 3rd Legion. He then swears to officially support the first prince, leaving the young man speechless. The protagonist is shocked, his eyes wide, not believing what he just heard. With the image of his uncle encouraging him, he freaks out, thinking he never wanted to be king. The man's declaration became a bombshell, and in the palace everyone congratulates the prince. Everyone celebrates, saying this is a great joy for the entire kingdom. With that, new knights and royal soldiers were assigned to serve His Highness. In addition, new servants and attendants were sent from the palace to care for the heir. With a sour look, the young man finds himself at the center of all this confusion. Irritated, he shouts this is a distraction and orders everyone back to their posts. Carls warns they came by royal decree, and the young man shouts for them to get out of his sight. The escort knight and a maid just watch the scene in complete silence. Later in his study, the heir celebrates that he has finally gotten some peace. But a voice calls him brother, and a figure runs hastily towards his study. The third prince appears, and the young man asks what he wants this time. His brother accuses him of acting suspiciously and secretly learning the sword from their uncle. With a mocking smile, Adrian says he tried to support his brother so he wouldn't look bad. The young man's relative gets angry, saying the heir has made a very big mistake. With a pointed finger, he shouts he will make him pay dearly for deceiving him. The protagonist thinks he has already told everyone he doesn't want the throne and will find the culprit. He then turns to his uncle, warning he will play along, but he must back off later. The young man complains he already said no and asks why his uncle did everything without consulting him. His uncle then explains House Valorhard is the shield that protects the kingdom from monsters. With a smile, he says nothing bad will happen to his royal family. The young man says if that's the case, he's happy, as it was only a matter of time. His relative then asks if he doesn't know the fate of a son who doesn't inherit the throne. The man says he will give him all the time he needs, but he should keep something in mind. He warns that the legitimacy of the firstborn does not disappear as long as he is alive. Alone, he thinks he has already said that no matter how much time he has, he won't change his mind. He adds what he needs to find is his power, which once reached transcendence. With a determined look, the heir thinks he would never want the right of succession. But he remembers having these thoughts until a certain moment in a ballroom. At that moment, the legitimate lineage and the eldest son of the royal family are announced. The herald then shouts that His Highness, Prince Adrian Leonberg, is entering the hall. All the nobles stare at him, and his uncle and brother watch him with very serious expressions. Amidst the crowd, a mysterious woman in a purple hood smiles at him from a distance. The young man then faces everyone, thinking this will last at least until the banquet is over,